Chapter 64, Caught It. 7 Whirlpools. The outer sect disciples simultaneously sighed in shock. Those that had been spectating instantly became alert. Zuo Shixiang really had concealed himself deeply. Yan Lu was slightly surprised as he looked at the plaza. Little Mo has something like this. He had just returned and didn't know what had happened with Zuo. Seeing Zuo releasing such an exquisite attack, he was very shocked. Pei Yuanran said, "Don't rush. There might be even bigger surprises later." The situation suddenly changed. Zuo, who had been thought as destined to lose, suddenly revealed a very strong sword move and also raised everyone's interest. Trapped between 7 sword energy whirlpools, Luo Li's face was still indifferent. He didn't seem to make a motion, but the 7 roaring sword energy whirlpools suddenly paused, the strands of sword energy flailing chaotically, but not one sword energy could enter the area 5 paces from Luo Li. Luo Li didn't slack off either. Pei Yuanran had a satisfied expression. Turning, he asked Xian Yen, "This move, extinguish, what level?" "The 5th. Xian Yen said. N. Luo Li's talent isn't bad, but it's a pity he met Wei Sheng. Yan Lu said aimlessly. The others all had a slightly discomfort expression. Wei Sheng's talents was much greater than Luo Li. Based on the perspective of the sect, the unequal treatment was natural. But the time that Luo Li spent with them was much longer than Wei Sheng, and much closer in terms of feelings. Pei Yuanran said, "This isn't something that can be dealt with. We, as Sword Xiu, uphold the rule of the strong and weak. Ambition is good, but what is needed is to understand one's own abilities." Qin Cheng asked for shapeless sword scripture from me. Xian Yen said. Must be for Luo Li. Yan Lu was extremely intelligent and said with a smile, shapeless sword scripture, and empty sword scripture, come from the same origin. Qin Cheng's conduct, it's very interesting. Shi Feng Rong's brows furrowed as she said, "Isn't that making the situation worse?" Pei Yuanran said, "Shimmy, don't worry. Competition is a good thing. They are still very young. We can look over them and slowly polish away. Maybe 1 or 2 of them will become accomplished and we will not fail our masters." Hearing this, the other 3 nodded their heads in agreement. The fight between Zuo and Luo Li intensified. Luo Li was very shocked inside. 3 months to reach this level of skill, his talent wasn't weaker than his own. Thinking about it, his heart felt like it was bursting, as though a fire had been lit. In the last decade, he was the most favored, most talented disciple in Wukong's sword sect. But there suddenly was a Wei Sheng who had an apparition at Zhuji. To nurture him, the sect elders had actually opened the sword cave. That was a benefit that he didn't even dare to think about. One Wei Sheng came out, and now there was a Zuo. He had never heard that the sect had such a fine water sword scripture. Did the Shushu pass on a new sword scripture? Once the thought formed, his heart felt like it was bit by a snake, his eyes dark. Zuo couldn't attend to Luo Li's mood. All of his attention was on controlling the sword. Li Water Sword Scripture, first 6 sword moves, he had practiced numerous times. The person who had created this sword scripture might not be as familiar as he was. After he comprehended the sword essence, he had done some minor adjustments to the sword moves again. The method he used for adjustment was extremely simple. Wherever the sword essence would pause, he would fearlessly change it until the sword essence would move as he wished without any blockage. This sword scripture, it had been transformed a long time ago. If it had been someone else, would they have dared to adjust like so? But Zuo didn't have any restraints. In the area of the sword, he had no fundamentals, and naturally wouldn't be restained. When he had been learning the 5-element spells of a Ling plant farmer, due to the fact that much of the contents in the jade stick had not been detailed, it had required him to speculate on his own. Over time, he was used to making adjustments to spells and had his own method. To use the sword essence as the model to change sword moves. If Xian Yen knew of the idea, he would certainly have praised it. He had seen Luo Li kill people in the Jade Scroll. It was mysterious and hard to detect. Up until now, he basically hadn't seen Luo Li Shixiang's flying sword. Empty sword scripture was truly amazing. Su Yi Shixiang had once said that empty sword scripture was the finest in the third-grade sword scriptures. From what he had seen today, it really was powerful. Couldn't see the flying sword, couldn't see the sword energy, you never knew where the other's attack would come from. Couldn't defend, couldn't see, couldn't guess, that kind of things were the ones that most easily created terror. Zuo was slightly frightened. Compared to Luo Li's untouched and leisurely state, Zuo was increasingly nervous. Zuo's battle experience was pitifully thin. After 2 continuous sword moves were deflected, it was a heavy blow to his confidence. However, he didn't want to admit defeat like this. Gritting his teeth, he released the third move. Countless sword energies formed a dense curtain of swords like a tide. Gleaming with the shine of water, it swayed like the waves. The third move, layered tide. The first move, flowing water, was light and clean, like sheep climbing a cliff, untraceable. The second move, 7 whirlpools, dense and sticky with hidden danger. And this move, layered tide, was continuous, becoming stronger as it continued. The layers of sword energy were like waves, layers of little waves merging together. The curtain made of swords, which had been like a drizzle of rain, suddenly became fierce and turbulent. Luo Li seemed to be right next to the water, the giant turbulence about to swallow him. Shocked gasps came from the surroundings. The past 2 moves might have surprised people, but it wasn't as intimidating as layered tide. In their eyes, a giant wave came down from the sky, unable to be dodged. Those outer sect disciples at odds with Zuo paled in fright, their legs weak. This giant wave wasn't water, but composed of layers of countless sword energies. Once one was swallowed, then they should wait to be cut up into pieces. It seemed that he had truly understood this sword scripture. Luo Li's eyes became even darker. Staring at the sword curtain as it came down, killing intent flashed through his eyes. He decided to give the zombie a blow that would completely destroy the other's confidence. He faced the sword curtain full of danger and turbulence and stepped forward. Another step. A third step. Break. The voice rang out over the entire plaza. Everyone felt their chests compress and then shock came onto their faces. Hiss. Like a small knife cutting cloth, not dissonant but a clear sound. The giant sword energy wave was cut in half. Seeing the sword curtain forcefully broken in 2, Zuo jumped in fright. Just as he was about to change moves, he suddenly detected a hint of danger. His heart alarmed, he didn't have time to think as his body fell down to the left. Even though he hadn't seen anything, but Zuo could clearly feel something brushed tightly next to him. He was like a frightened cat, all the hair on his body standing up. Zuo, having dropped to the floor, couldn't care about the pain on his body, and scrambled to distance himself from Luo Li. Oh my heart almost jumped out. It seems that Zuo Shixiang isn't weak. Pity that he encountered Luo Li Shixiang. One of the surrounding disciples couldn't help stating. That's right. Look at Luo Li Shixiang, that's the composure of a strong person. That stride, that expression, Zuo Shixiang is still a bit weak. Someone else in the surrounding followed. Yes. If Wei Xing Shixiang could come out, then it might be enough. Haha, don't be impatient. In any case, the battle between the 2 will happen. Really? Think about it, can one mountain have 2 tigers? Zuo couldn't hear any sound. He could only hear the beat of his heart. He furiously panted, his chest a heaving bellows. He stared with wide eyes at Luo Li, his mouth dry. So risky. Just that little bit. Just now, Zuo's brain had even turned white for a second. This was the first time he had met such danger. The zombie face was full of dust, his entire body was muddy and formed a sorry figure. His actions were that of a true greenhorn, emphasizing Luo Li's strong composure. After a long while, Zuemo gradually recovered his calm. Luo Li wasn't far away, smirking as he looked at him. Luo Li suddenly found that this way was very good. His intention had been to embarrass Zuemo. In front of the sect leader, he naturally couldn't injure Zuemo. So let him completely humiliate Zuemo. The gap between you and I, it's much larger than you think. Having made a decision, Luo Li smiled coldly as he looked at Zuemo. He wasn't in a rush to attack. It was like a cat playing catch with a mouse. Hao Min's face was smug. If it wasn't that the elders were at the side, she would have definitely been laughing. Hatred flashed across her eyes. Dare to fight with this lady, you scum, today, you'll play until you die. Luo Li casually walked forward. Zuemo unconsciously shrunk back. That action, it was very similar to a startled bird. Laughter roared through the surroundings. On the stage, Shi Fengrong's face was black. Zuemo's eyes widened as he stared unblinkingly at Luo Li. He didn't hear the laughter from the surroundings. No one knew the feelings under that zombie face of his, just like no one knew what he was thinking. The strong terror actually made him even more focused. Shitty isn't attacking. Luo Li's voice was full of mockery as it spread. It was like a cat teasing a mouse. The scattered laughter made Luo Li feel smug. He even had the leisure to look at Hao Min. Hao Min saw Luo Li look at her and instantly sent a flirtatious look back. Luo Li was greatly encouraged and resolved to torment this distasteful little zombie today. Zuemo didn't speak. His eyes were wide as they stared at Luo Li. Just having tasted the power of empty sword scripture, he didn't dare to slip up. Since Shitty isn't attacking, then I won't be courteous. Luo Li smiled at Hao Min and drawled. Zuemo's pupils suddenly shrunk. Like a grasshopper, he suddenly leapt towards the right. Hiss! Zuemo felt his left arm become cold. A piece of fabric flew into the sky. A cold and intimidating sword energy passed right next to his skin. Ping! Zuemo had leapt with too much power and hit the granite stone ground. He instantly bared his teeth in pain. Not having the time to care about the pain, he rolled and climbed up. His hair was loose, his clothing disheveled, a large hole at his shoulder. Where are Shitty's sword moves? Luo Li's cold voice had a hint of mockery. Hiss! Zuemo didn't have time to think and jumped sideways again. At the same time, the right hand sleeve floated into the sky. Ping! Pain! Climbing up, he stared at Luo Li. The laughter from the surroundings, he didn't hear it. Luo Li didn't give Zuemo any time to rest, the sword energies coming one after the other. Piece by piece, cloth flew into the sky. Zuemo's clothing almost became strips of cloth. His entire body was covered in dust and dirt. Some parts of the skin were bleeding. He was like a beggar. No one was laughing anymore. The entire plaza was unusually silent. Many outer sect disciples didn't want to look. Xiaoguo bit her lips, unaware that her tears had fallen down. Li Yingfeng's eyes were about to spit fire. Half crouching on the ground, Zuemo panted heavily. His wide eyes were staring fixedly at Luo Li. His ears still didn't hear any sound. He was breathing fast, his throat dry and burning. He didn't notice it, just like no one noticed excitement flash and then hide in his eyes. Caught it. Chapter 65, Li Water Burning Heavens, should we call for an end? Yan Lu said with slight dissatisfaction, his brows furrowed as he looked at the sorry figure of Zuemo in the plaza. Before, he had felt that even though Luo Li had been somewhat arrogant, but overall, he had been very good. Today's battle had changed his impression of Luo Li to an extremely terrible one. He might not be as strong as Xian Yan, but he was still a Jindan Shouja. How could he not see? Luo Li clearly had the advantage, but like a cat catching a mouse, he was playing with the other. The two were still disciples of the same sect, regardless of how serious the conflict. What was happening now was somewhat over the top. Inside, he blamed Zhuo Mo for trying to be brave. He had clearly given Zhuo Mo a Ling armor, but Zhuo Mo didn't wear it. What he didn't know was that when Zhuo Mo had been practicing in the river, he naturally had taken the armor off. After he returned, he forgot to put it on. Glancing at the dark face of Shi Feng Rong, Pei Yuanran smiled, "No rush, no rush." Then he said in a heavy tone, "In the future, the rules need to be adjusted." Of course. Yan Lu agreed. In the past, the feelings between the disciples had been pretty good and nothing like this had happened. Right now, the situation in the sect is complicated. It's better to change the rules. In the battlefield, Zhuo Mo panted heavily. He blocked off all the outside noise. He stared fixedly at Luo Li only 10 steps away from him. He caught it. Caught the barely perceptible ripple. Empty sword scripture was like traveling through the void, and that made it hard to detect the sword. However, to humiliate Zhuo Mo, Luo Li had purposefully let out a small flaw to give Zhuo Mo time to dodge. He definitely wouldn't have thought that this flaw that he purposefully left behind let Zhuo Mo find an unique characteristic of empty sword scripture. It had to be said that empty sword scripture deserved to be the finest among the third-grade sword scriptures. Up until now, Zhuo Mo hadn't found Luo Li's flying sword. This was the speciality of empty sword scripture. The flying sword could travel through space and pierce through it to wound others, giving others the feeling that it was non-existent. However, Luo Li was far from the level of his sword essence becoming non-existent. It was an extremely small ripple. Just before the flying sword would appear, there would be a very small Ling energy ripple. This Ling energy ripple, in the midst of the unsteady surroundings, could be easily overlooked. However, as Luo Li repeatedly played, Zhuo Mo, who had been highly alert, caught this sign. Zhuo Mo's cultivation was far from Luo Li, but his spiritual power was far above Luo Li. This was also the reason he could catch this small fluctuation. As long as he could catch the fluctuation, empty sword, it wasn't untraceable any longer. On a zombie face smeared with dirt and sweat, it seemed that there were 2 deep red flames jumping deep in his eyes. The smugness on Luo Li's face gradually disappeared. Previously, every time he made a blow, Zhuo Mo's sorry state caused a lot of laughter. But afterwards, the laughter decreased in number. Presently, the entire plaza was dead silent. No matter how disheveled a figure Zhuo Mo was, there wasn't any more noise. This made Luo Li feel very uncomfortable. He decided to end this boring battle using the move he had just comprehended. The mockery on his face disappeared. His expression turned grave, all the Ling energy in his body moved. The air seemed to have solidified, silent and deadly. The disciples that were spectating felt a heavy pressure form as though it was tangible, and their expressions all changed. They could not dodge it. Luo Li Shixiang, had he reached this kind of level? Even those inner sect disciples couldn't help but show shock on their faces. Luo Li Shixiang's cultivation was stronger than them, but they had not thought that Luo Li Shixiang would be this strong. Light flashed through Yan Li's eyes. The others also looked down with solemn expressions. "Shitty, pay attention, and get ready to interfere," Pei Yuanran said firmly to Xian Yan. His eyes were tightly locked on Luo Li, seemingly excited. With his experience, how could he not see that this was a move that combined empty sword scripture and shapeless sword scripture? Empty sword scripture and shapeless sword scripture were born from the same root. In the past, void sword scripture was broken into 2 sword scriptures, empty sword scripture and shapeless sword scripture. All these years, many people had wanted to put the 2 sword scriptures back together, but no one had succeeded. In the past, if Xian Yan hadn't cultivated Ice Dragon sword scripture, he would have certainly done this. Basically, any disciple of the sect that practiced one of the 2 sword scriptures would try their best to combine the 2 sword scriptures. So when they saw Luo Li's move, Pei Yuan ran and the other three were instantly absorbed. No one knew how to learn Void Sword Scripture, but there were many records about this sword scripture. All the records would always have one word: essence moves and rises. With Luo Li's cultivation, he wouldn't be able to exude this kind of presence unless he comprehended sword essence. Yet, in the eyes of experts like Xian Yan, whether Luo Li had comprehended sword essence or not could be seen with a glance. Then there was only one possibility: combining the sword scriptures. How could they not be excited? Zuo didn't know any of this. In his eyes, there was only Luo Li, only that ripple. Luo Li's presence was extremely shocking, but in Zuo's eyes, it was far less frightening than before. The fluctuation was too strong. He almost didn't need to try to locate the relative position of this Ling energy fluctuation. It was clearer than any previous time. The previous sword moves might not have been as strong in terms of presence, but that fluctuation was extremely small. If it wasn't that Zuo's consciousness was strong, he wouldn't have been able to detect it. Come. Laboriously waiting for a chance, Zuo's pupils shrunk and the ice crystal sword that had been floating landed in his hand. Stepping forward in a half-crouch, his body slightly bent, the sword tip pointing to the ground, the eyes half closed. All the fire, all the desire for battle, all the resolve, all of it started to retreat inside. Zuo was like a dirty stone statue, motionless. Luo Li saw Zuo's posture and a faint icy smile floated on the corner of his mouth. In front of absolute power, any kind of rebellion was useless. He wanted the sect leader and the others to see his potential, see that he was more exceptional than Wei Sheng. He needed to take back what belonged to him. He didn't notice that at this time, Xian Yan Shushu's attention moved from his body to Zuo's body. Xian Yan's usually stone-cold face was in a rare state of surprise. Luo Li didn't notice. If he had noticed, maybe he would think of what was behind it. He raised his right hand, his fingers forming a sword, the Ling energy revolving. Some meticulous outer sect disciples instantly noticed that a layer of faint white mist had formed and surrounded Zuo's lowered ice crystal sword. It looked like Zuo was holding a ball of mist. Luo Li felt that the time was right. Without hesitation, he attacked, his fingers lightly swiping at Zuo. All the accumulated anger, it seemed to have found a place to vent and furiously flooded following Luo Li's fingers. Just at this moment, Zuo suddenly opened his eyes. It was like a dead motionless statue had suddenly come alive. Zuo's clear bright eyes were entirely red like bloody eyes, but also like a roaring fire, burning like his desire to fight and his resolve. The moment he opened his eyes, all the energy that had retreated suddenly exploded. Using all the power in his body, he swung the sword against the current viciously upwards. Li. The raspy voice was explosive, like a fireball suddenly exploding. Biding his time for so long, it was all for this move. All the Ling energy, all the spiritual energy, Zuo didn't keep any of it back. All of it was poured into this, Li water burning heavens. His eyes glared furiously almost as though they were going to pop out. That zombie face that was eternally expressionless was twisted like a dancing flame. Luo Li's expression changed. What was that? He clearly saw countless jumping flames, countless flames filled with explosiveness, but why? They clearly were just water. Impossible. That was impossible. That damned zombie had clearly been using a water element sword scripture. How could it transform into fire? It had to be said that Li water sword scripture was a very unique sword scripture. The uniqueness wasn't just found in manipulating water like fire. Even its sword moves were very unique. In the 7 moves, the first 6 moves, they were all classical water element sword moves, they walked the path of water. Anyone who encountered it would naturally classify it as a classical water element sword scripture, but only up till the very last move. That one took a huge curve. Manipulate water like fire. Without having learned the last move, Li water burning heavens, it wasn't possible to really comprehend Li water sword scripture. All the essence of Li Water Sword scripture was in this final move. Even the people who practiced it had a hard time finding it, to say nothing of the people facing it. Additionally, while the sword moves that Zuemo had previously used were skilled and smooth, but in each move, not one bit of sword essence was revealed. Zuemo had thought it through. Sword essence was the only place that he could win. If the other was alert against it, he didn't even have the tiniest bit of hope. So in the beginning, no matter if it was flowing water, 7 whirlpools, or layered tides, he didn't use sword essence. Only now. In front of Zuemo, a crack suddenly appeared. It gave off a terrifying presence like an ancient monster that would eat people. Joy made its way onto the faces of Pei Yuan Ran and the others. Only Xian Yan's gaze was tightly locked on Zuemo. What was going to come out of the crack? The flying sword. Zuemo seemed to be combusting. His eyes were blood red and he roared, not dodging in the slightest. The ice crystal sword, swung with all his power, went up against the flow as a layer of strange and clear water flames appeared. All the disciples, no matter inner sect or outer, no one could keep their composure. Even the steady Qin Chang's expression changed dramatically. Sword essence. That was sword essence. In their eyes, Zuemo was like a ball of fire, a strange and clear water flame. Presence. A vicious and brutal presence suddenly spread out with Zuemo as the center. Luoli finally was shocked. Not caring about anything else, all the Ling energy in his body started to revolve. The ice crystal sword suddenly lightened. The strange water flame left the sword, transforming into a silently burning fire sword formed out of water, accurately hitting that crack. Everyone could only see a patch of white and nothing else. Their ears rang, they couldn't hear anything. The disciples that had been closer felt that someone had pushed them heavily, forcing them to move 6 or 7 steps behind before they could steady themselves. Only a long while later did everyone's eyes recovered. When they looked at the battlefield, everyone truly was dumbstruck. There was a gigantic and deep hole in the plaza. Inside the plaza, Zuemo's upper half was naked, his clothing having disappeared. He was still locked in his position of swinging the sword. The light in his eyes retreated. He was like a statue. At the edge of the deep pit, blood seeped out of the corner of Luo Li Shixiang's mouth. His hair was a mess, not much of his clothing had remained. His eyes were fixed on Zuemo Fu. Luo Li Shixiang suddenly spat out blood and fell down backwards. At the same time, Zuemo still maintained his attack position as he silently dropped to the ground. Chapter 66, Awakening. Zuemo slowly opened his eyes and couldn't help but groan because of his sore body. Shixiang, you're awake. An unfamiliar female stood beside the bed, her expression respectful. Zuemo noticed a hint of awe in her eyes. Based on her clothing, she should be an outer sect female disciple, but Zuemo didn't know her. Where is this? Zuemo struggled to sit up. This is Fragrant Ginger Yard. Because you were injured, the mistress took you here. The female outer sect disciple answered hurriedly. Zuemo relaxed and thought, oh, so it had been master. Feeling the hunger in his stomach, he raised his head to ask, is there something to eat? The outer sect female disciple nodded, please wait. She then turned and left. After a while, she carried a bowl of rice and several dishes in. Smelling the dense Ling energy coming from the food, Zuemo felt his mind become alert, and felt even more hungry. Without a second wasted, he started to feast. The rice in the bowl wasn't the normal rice that he usually ate but rather cooked with Ling grains. The small dishes were all prepared using Ling vegetables. The Ling energy was abundant. Thus extremely appropriate for people like Zuemo who had just been wounded to recover. To someone poor like Zuemo, when had he ever eaten such food? He had a ration of Ling grains each month, but he didn't know how to prepare it. The preparation of Ling food needed extremely specialized techniques. This process was called food cultivation. All kinds of raw ingredients filled with rich Ling energy, after being especially paired, and then meticulously prepared, the Ling energy in the food would be completely released and it was very easy to absorb. Absorbing Ling energy from Ling food was much gentler than absorbing it from Jingshi. However, that was something only those who had enough Jingshi could experience. Compared to other high-level Ling foods, Ling grains were the most basic and widespread Ling food. However, Zuemo sold the Ling grains he received each month to turn it into Jingshi. Having the Ling vein in the stone room, the effect of Ling grains were not major for him. This was the first time he was able to experience such luxury. The skill of the person who cooked was high and the Ling energy thick. Just smelling it, Zuemo felt his mind lighten. When the food entered his mouth, he almost swallowed his tongue as well. Like a storm, the Ling food on the table was swept clean, not a speck remaining. Zuemo stretched, still wanting more. At this time, the female outer sect disciple reminded him, Shixiang can meditate, which will help in the absorption of Ling energy. Hearing this, Zuemo rushed into the lotus position to meditate. Seeing this, the female disciple quietly cleaned up the dishes and then closed the door as she left. Waking up from the meditation, Zuemo felt his mind was completely refreshed and unspeakably comfortable. Thinking about the Ling food he had just eaten, he couldn't help but sigh at the effect of the meal, which was even more effective than meditating for 4 hours in the stone room. But the Ling vein in the stone room was completely free, and while there hadn't been that much food, the price of the Ling food definitely wasn't cheap. If it wasn't a reward from the sect, he certainly couldn't afford it. Pushing open the door, he walked outside the room. It was a small yard outside the door. At this time, Zuemo knew where he was. This place was a small out-of-the-way yard in fragrant ginger yard. He would pass by this place every day. It seemed familiar upon further observation. He decided to go see his master. Walking out of the little yard, he saw quite a few female outer sect disciples along his way. Zuemo instantly felt the completely different change in their attitude. Previously, they had been respectful of him. Now, there was a hint of awe in this respect. This awe that came from the heart, it caused their spines to bend more, their attitude more careful and respectful. Zuemo wasn't used to it. Su Qing saw Zuemo and hurried to bow, Shixiang. Master is waiting for. Even Su Qing was using the formal, you. Zuemo felt very uncomfortable. He shook his head and said, it's not good that Shimi calls me this, it's too formal. Shixiang is right, Su Qing was wrong. Su Qing smiled warmly. Previously, she had helped Zuemo, but she didn't think he would end up doing so well. Who could have known that Zuemo could fight to a standstill with Luo Li Shixiang? When she had seen it, she was dumbstruck. Even now, she still felt disbelief. This incident caused the entire fragrant ginger yard to take a new look at this zombie Shixiang. Su Qing was smart and knew that this fight had completely decided Shixiang's position in fragrant ginger yard and the sect. Before, Hao Min Shiji had been arrogant and despotic in fragrant ginger yard. In the future, she would definitely be more restrained. If she still didn't control herself, then she would be too stupid. Zuemo Shixiang might look slow, but no matter if it was cunning, power, or talent, he surpassed Hao Min. Su Qing knew of the battle between the inner sect disciples. As an outer sect disciple, she naturally felt closer to Wei Sheng and Zuemo, who had once been outer sect disciples as well. However, Su Qing was still careful and aware of herself. Many people, when they prospered, their temper and personality became drastically different. Prudence would never be a mistake. However, Zuemo Shixiang's personality seemed much better than she had imagined. Zuemo's zombie face still was expressionless. He nodded at Su Qing and then walked towards Master's Dan room. Pushing open the door to enter, he saw Master Shi Feng Rong. Now you know to act brave. When Shi Feng Rong saw him, she discourteously started scolding, just admit defeat earlier next time. Did you have to injure yourself like that? She completely forgot she had sent a death order for Zhuemo to not lose. Zhuemo perceptively didn't mention it and muttered in compliance. To argue with this person, he didn't have the guts. Shi Fengrong's tone relaxed, but, you didn't lose face for me. Very good. Zhuemo heard this and rolled his eyes inside. This is probably what you really thought inside. Shi Fengrong was very satisfied with this disciple. Even though he had only been a ling plant farmer, but she had been shocked at his talent at dan making. He could make the golden crow pill even when he just started to learn dan making. The first time Zhuemo made the golden crow pill, it could be explained by luck. Afterwards, when he found the basic method, she hadn't said anything, but she had been very shocked inside. This wasn't something that could be accomplished by luck. Seeing his exceptional talent, Shi Fengrong had made even stricter demands of him. She didn't have any hope for the fight between Zhuemo and Luoli, regardless that she had ordered that he could not lose. She was clear that the two weren't on the same power level. Yet Zhuemo once again gave her a surprise. Even though he didn't win, but he truly didn't lose. In a short 3 months, he was able to comprehend sword essence. This kind of sword talent, even the cold second Shixiang was surprised. The sect leader and third Shixiang had gaped. She had been very smug inside. 3 months, and you were able to comprehend sword essence. Your talent at the sword isn't weak. If it was buried, it would be a pity. Shi Fengrong slowly said, in the future, you can go to your second Shibua to learn about the sword. I'm telling you, if you go to your second Shibua, don't dishonor me. If I learn that you are slacking, humph. The snort was very cold. Zhuemo silently grimaced. To go to second Shibua's place to learn the sword, this treatment, it was extremely high in Wukong's sword sect. It was something that every disciple dreamed about. If it was in the past, Zhuemo would have nodded and agreed, but now. He thought that there was still an idle and steady Pu Yao in his consciousness, and then thought about second Shibua's sword-like gaze. Zhuemo felt he had dropped into ice. He still remembered the snow-white sword essence of second Shibua slicing through the Black Sea the night he met Pu Yao for the first time. Even the kind of strong Yaoma that was Pu Yao, he still wasn't second Shibua's opponent. If second Shibua found Pu Yao in his consciousness, his own ending would be of the utmost miserable. What was a reward in other people's eyes, Zhuemo wanted to avoid it. This disciple just wants to learn dan making from master. Before Zhuemo could finish, Shi Fengrong interrupted, dan making is dan making. Cultivating the sword is cultivating the sword. No one said that making dan means not being able to cultivate the sword. Stop talking and go where I tell you. But, Shi Fengrong looked suspiciously at Zhuemo. You have a question? Being pierced with master's gaze, Zhuemo's heart jumped rapidly. Don't let master see anything fishy. He hurriedly shook his head. No. No. If you don't have any, then go. Shi Fengrong impatiently waved her hand to rush Zhuemo out. Coming out of master's dan room, Zhuemo felt very uncertain. Of the 4 elders, the one he was most afraid of meeting was Xian Yen Shibua. Whenever Xian Yen Shibua looked at him, Zhuemo felt that the other could see him clearly, and that all secrets were revealed in second Shibua's eyes. But this obstacle could not be avoided. Zhuemo cautiously went to second Shibua's residence. Second Shibua was skilled in 2 areas. One was cultivating the sword. The other was forging. Wei Xing Shixiang had personally been taught by him. Luo Li had once received his teachings. Other than that, Su Yi Shixiang was the only disciple of second Shibua and learned forging from him. Zhuemo could only walk towards second Shibua's residence. Second Shibua resided alone at Sun Lookout Peak. This was a place that Zhuemo had never stepped in before. Following the winding mountain road, Zhuemo was extremely careful and furtive. When he reached the peak of Sun Lookout Peak, he was shocked still. The peak was very large, but there was only a small grass hut. Other than that, no other living thing was on the ground. Zuo was about 150 steps from the grass hut. These 150 steps, he walked with his heart beating fast. A few times, he almost turned and ran away. Under his feet, not 1 foot of ground was whole. Actually, not just under his feet but the entire top of Sun Lookout Peak, there wasn't a whole piece of ground. There were intersecting cracks. The ground of Sun Lookout Peak seemed to have been heavily plowed countless times. When he stepped on the upturned soil, Zuo's heart shrunk. Sword essence. The broken soil on the upturned ground under his feet contained extremely strong sword essence. They followed out as though they wanted to cut off Zuo's legs, or as though they wanted to burrow inside his body from the soles of his feet. The cold killing intent made Zuo's hairs stand on end. He unconsciously swallowed, controlling his impulse to take out the ice crystal sword and gritted his teeth as he walked forward. One step, one step. It was like his feet were stepping on countless sword tips. Each step was extremely careful. Zuo felt the impulse countless times to take out ice crystal sword. It was an instinctive response, but each time, he would stop it. This patch of broken ground concealed countless sword essences. If he really summoned the ice crystal sword, that was really poking the hornet's nest. Those hidden sword essences would swarm and rip him to shreds. Damn it! This ghastly place. Formal way of saying, you. The pinyin is nin as opposed to the informal uni. Chapter 67, Questions and Answers. Zuo was like a tense string as he carefully moved in front of the door to the grass hut. Just the slightest bit of outside force and he would move. He took a deep breath. Even though he had broken through to the second breath of embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, and didn't need to use his nose and mouth to breathe, but when he was nervous, he still unconsciously followed the familiar pattern of breathing to calm his emotions. Letting his mind settle, he gave a deep bow to the wooden door of the grass hut. Disciple Zuo greets Shibwa. Come in. Xin Yen Shibwa's icy voice came out of the grass hut. The wooden door opened silently. The inside of the hut was a patch of darkness. Zuo's heart couldn't help but tense up once again. He gathered his courage and walked in. The interior of the grass hut was extremely crude. There was only a meditation mat, other than that, there was nothing else. Xin Yen Shibwa was sitting on the meditation mat, a small stream of sunlight entering the grass hut and falling onto Xin Yen Shibwa's body. Shibwa's body was under the sun but his face was shadowed by the hair in front of his forehead and couldn't be seen clearly until he opened his eyes. In the shadow, 2 dots of ice suddenly lit up. For some unknown reason, Zuo felt a bone-aching cold flow from the tail of spine upwards, all the muscles in his body paralyzed. You are a surprise to me. Xin Yan's voice was like a cold mist, permeating through Zuo's skin into his heart, so cold that he almost couldn't move. You don't have any talent at the sword. Xin Yan said calmly. Zuo's heart suddenly tensed. He felt that he almost forgot to breathe at this instant. Terror, like the flood overcoming the dam, instantly broke through Zuo's psychological defenses. Did Shibwa find out? You could comprehend sword essence in 3 months, that surprised me. Xin Yan didn't look at Zuo. He slowly closed his eyes, the 2 dots of ice disappearing into the shadows. I'm not concerned with what fortuitous encounters you had, but you have to remember, if you do anything against this sect in the future, I will kill you with my sword. The tone was calm, as though it was narrating a simple matter. It was like Zuo suddenly rose from hell into heaven. This joyful surprise stunned him for a moment. He had already prepared to stretch out his neck to be killed. He had assumed that second Shibwa had already seen through him, and seen that Pu Yao was in his consciousness. The tense muscles on his body instantly relaxed. Zuo felt his body was weak, the lingering fears in his heart like a flood, almost swallowing him. His feet were sore and weak. Yes. Zuo hurriedly answered, his mind slightly steadier. The Li Water Sword scripture that you cultivate is unique but is limited by the knowledge of the author, and it would be hard for it to improve further in the future. Xin Yen didn't open his eyes as he said calmly, and your fundamentals are too weak. Several places need to be changed. However, the places that you changed yourself, they weren't bad. Afterwards, Xin Yen pointed out a few spots. Zhuo Mo, now having calmed down, was delighted and willing. The places that Shibwe pointed out, it was exactly the places that he felt were uncomfortable and didn't flow properly, but he hadn't known how to change it. Hearing Shibwe's advice, he instantly understood. After that, Xin Yen Shibwe threw a jade scroll to Zhuo Mo. These are some basic sword scriptures. Practice them more. Pausing, he said with a hint of regret, your primary focus is dan-making, and you're also a ling plant farmer. You are not suited to cultivate the sword. For sword shio, what is important is not to be distracted by other matters, the clear heart sword. You, try to do your best. Bidding farewell to Shibwe, when Zhuo Mo passed over the mud in front of the grass hut, he didn't feel any of the sword essence that had been there previously. Just like those sword essences knew him and hid themselves. On the road from Sun Lookout Peak to Little West Wind Yard, Zhuo Mo had been pondering Shibwe's words. Shibwe's meaning was extremely clear. If he wanted to progress another step on the road of the sword shio, and really accomplish something, he must abandon being a ling plant farmer and dan-making, and only practice the sword. Otherwise, he would find it hard to progress further on the sword. Shibwe's words were as clear as they could be, but Zhuo Mo knew what he was worth. If he was like Wei Xing Shixiang, he might abandon everything and be a pure sword shio, but he wasn't. He knew just how much talent he had. If he didn't have Pu Yao, he basically couldn't have been able to comprehend sword essence. He had been sliced several thousand times before he had comprehended Shibwe's tidal sword essence. If it had been Wei Xing Shixiang, he would have needed only a few dozen before he could have comprehended it. If he didn't have the experience of comprehending the tidal sword essence, he certainly wouldn't have been able to comprehend the Li Water sword essence in 3 months. He was fated to not walk Wei Xing Shixiang's path. As he walked with the wind blowing gently in his face, Zhuo Mo's mood rose. The road each person walked was different. Even more, the progress he had made was something he didn't dare to even think of before. Yet now, he had made it. His mood recovered quickly. After the rise and fall in his emotions today, his body felt slightly exhausted. He needed rest. However, when he walked to the mouth of the West Wind Valley, his feet stopped and he paused on this spot. Aiya. Zhuo Mo Shixiang, you finally came. Shixiang was so strong in the sect assessment, Shidi has come to especially give congratulations, just a humble gift. Does Shixiang still remember me? That year, if it wasn't for your little art of cloud and rain, I would have been homeless. This little brother still remembers it. Shixiang, this little brother cultivates the sword, but doesn't have a master. Shixiang, us sisters from the eastern peak, looking at the dense mass of people, Zhuo Mo's head rang. The entrance of West Wind Valley was filled to the limit. This scene, it was even busier than the last time when Zhuo Mo had been promoted to an inner sect disciple. Even the gifts they had prepared were higher quality than last time. Some outer sect disciples that had good family backgrounds had really spent a lot. Desperately needing rest, Zhuo Mo felt his head was going to explode. Stop the noise. Suddenly, a voice passed over, and everyone instantly quieted. Su Yi had accompanied 2 females over. Zhuo Mo saw clearly that it was eldest Shiji Gong Sun Qing and Su Yi Xia Shiji. The one that had spoken was Su Yi Shixiang. Su Yi waved his hand, leave. Seeing the situation, the outer sect disciples scattered like birds. Su Yi bowed to Zhuo Mo and said, Shidi, don't blame me for overstepping. It really is too noisy with all these people here. Zhuo Mo hurriedly returned the bow, many thanks, Shixiang. This little brother's eyes are already dizzy. If Shixiang had been just a moment late, this little brother would have been dead right here. Then he bowed towards Gong Sun Qing and Su Yixia, eldest Shiji, Yixia Shiji. You are actually somewhat interesting, eh? A green-clad Su Yixia laughed. Zhuo was deeply cautious and alert towards this innocent-looking girl. Liang Feng Shiji said that the jade scroll had been from Su Yixia Shiji. What the intentions were at that time of giving him that jade scroll were hard to tell. Gong Sun Qing smiled warmly, responding, Shiji looks very tired. Why don't we come another day? What is Shiji saying? Come. Everyone come in and have some tea. Zhuo hurriedly said and then made a joke, but I don't have Shixiang's Ling tea. Please don't blame me. Everyone started moving towards the valley. Each person made with a pondering expression as their eyes encountered the ruined Jinji scattered on the ground. They had heard earlier on that Luo Li had gone to challenge Zhuo at the valley. The news was passed furiously through Wukong sword sect. Thinking about the match that neither of the two had won, all three of them had their own thoughts. Zhuo didn't have any expression. In fact, he couldn't make expressions. That zombie face couldn't hold any expressions. Entering the West Wind Yard and seeing Zhuo return, the gray-beaked goose on the roof made a call as though she was giving a greeting. Just having escaped death, Zhuo's mood was very good and he waved his hand in greeting to the female bird. Gong Sun Qing saw Zhuo's youthful actions and couldn't help but grin. Su Yixia only took a glance. Seeing it was only just a normal gray-beaked goose, she looked away with a hint of disdain in her eyes. Her steed was a third-grade golden fire pupil beast. Extremely intimidating and dominant. In her eyes, a gray-beaked goose was for country bumpkins only. The group of four sat down. Zhuo made a pot of tea. The three touched it with their lips before setting it down. Zhuo didn't care. What he had was just normal tea. It was a bit cheap. Normally, even he didn't drink it. It really shocked me that Shidi comprehended sword essence in 3 months. Shidi is really too mean to not have slipped any hint and make me worry. Su Yi said with a smile. Zhuo quickly answered, it isn't that this little brother deliberately concealed it. Even this little brother hadn't thought it would be possible. Afraid of saying it and being embarrassed, this little brother had been practicing in the river and had been swept a few hundred miles away by the water. Even the sect leader had to send someone to search. The other three people's expressions instantly became slightly strange. They had already used the incident of Zhuo being swept away by the river as a joke. The three had mocked or disdained it. Now that Zhuo mentioned it in self-mockery, the three instantly didn't feel good inside. Zhuo had comprehended sword essence and was walking far in front of them. Previously mocking Zhuo, it clearly showed their ignorance and stupidity. What sword scripture is Shidi practicing? Su Yixia asked with a face of innocence. Li water sword scripture. Zhuo didn't deny it. If they wanted to know, they naturally could find out. It is a 3rd grade 5 elements sword scripture. Pity that Shibwa said that it would be difficult for it to progress more. Hearing this, Su Yixia's cunning eyes couldn't help but reveal delight. Zhuo coincidentally caught it. He couldn't resist sneering inside. This brat definitely didn't have a good heart. Shidi, don't be discouraged. Gong Sun Qing comforted, your talents are so outstanding, Shibwa and sect leader wouldn't waste your talents. Shiji is right. Feeling the concern of the other, Zhuo felt goodwill for her and bowed towards Gong Sun Qing. It might have been that she would be marrying soon, but she didn't walk closely with Qin Cheng's group. It seemed like that she didn't want to involve herself in the battle between the two sides. This time, it is me that is searching for Shidi. The eldest Shiji smiled, her tone gentle, these two have been taken along to keep me company. I heard that Shidi can make a kind of lingdan called Golden Crow Pill which has a probability of making Golden Crow fire. Is that true? The appraisal says so. In reality, this little brother has not tried. Zhuo said cautiously. That's good. Gong Sun Qing smiled and took out a jade box. I want to use this time to exchange with Shitty for 100 golden crow pills. Shitty, take a look. Finishing, her slender fingers pushed the jade box in front of Zuo-mo. Zuo-mo was slightly puzzled as he opened the jade box. The moment he opened the jade box, his pupils suddenly expanded, glee was unable to be disguised in his eyes. Chapter 68, A Rare Leisure. There was a pale blue third-grade water grass lying in the jade box. Light flickered across the plant and it exuded a faint coldness. Icy cloud grass. It was a very rare water element ling grass. Its shadow could be found in many kinds of high-level Dan recipes. To say nothing else, Zuo-mo knew that even Master didn't have ice cloud grass in her fields. Ice cloud grass grew in the coldest of climates, it wasn't easily grown and was hard to find. It probably wasn't possible to buy such a high-quality ice cloud grass in Dongfu, and showed just how valuable it was. This is too valuable. Zuo-mo strongly controlled the greed in his heart and pushed the jade box back in front of the eldest Shiji. A flicker of admiration ran through Gong Sun Qing's eyes. She once again pushed the jade box to Zuo-mo. Don't refuse, Shitty. This ice cloud grass, it leans towards the cold and the water element. The Dan that can be made from this would certainly be Ling Dan of the ice and water elements. In this sect, other than Shitty, no one is appropriate for this. Zuo-mo thought and then said, 200. The other 100 would be a token of Shitty's goodwill. Gong Sun Qing didn't refuse and smiled broadly, many thanks, Shitty. Everyone talked for a bit longer, but their interests didn't match. Zuo-mo felt especially negative towards Su Yixia. The three stood up and left. Zuo-mo walked with them to the mouth of the valley. Before leaving, Su Yi couldn't resist reminding Zuo-mo of the golden crow pills he had already ordered. Zuo-mo nodded. Zuo-mo could finally take a breath. Returning to his little yard, he didn't want to do anything. Today's ups and downs, it was enough to tire him out. But he still moved the ice cloud grass into the Ling spring of the rock room first. That Ling spring was near the Ling vein and the Ling energy was extremely thick, and suited for the growth of the ice cloud grass. The reason he had been so happy seeing the ice cloud grass wasn't completely due to its value, but because the jade scrolls of Elder Wei Nan recorded a kind of water method to make a Ling Dan. Its main ingredient was ice cloud grass. This Ling Dan was called Ice Cloud Dan. It could dramatically increase a cultivator's power over water. The jade scroll hadn't recorded just how great the increase was. However, for Zuo-mo, it still would be very beneficial. He wasn't a sword shio and didn't need to consider the problem of the chaos of the 5 elements. Any element in the 5 elements was extremely useful for him. If his water power grew, the power of his Li water sword scripture would be even greater and easier for him to manipulate. But temporarily, he didn't have the time to make the ice cloud Dan. He was in deep debt. Golden Crow Pill. Whenever he thought about the enormous amount of golden crow pills, Zuo-mo had the impulse to faint. But today, it wouldn't be today. He buried his head and slept. The next morning, Zuo-mo woke up and started his crazy Dan-making days. Su Qing seemed to know of the matter and had prepared large amounts of the ingredients for the fasting pill beforehand. Looking at the mountain of raw materials in front of him, Zuo-mo wanted to cry. He forced himself to start. A crowd of people appeared in a mountain valley not far from Dongfu. Their clothing was different and so was their expression. It's nearby. One of the people said. His face was serious, but it's hard to find the exact location. I think that it's here. Another yellow-clad cultivator snorted coldly and followed. We've gone through the other 12 towns. Other than here, where else? The other people looked at the silver-clad man that seemed to be the leader. The expression on this male's face was extremely faint. The long robes on his body seemed to have been woven from silver thread, the light gleaming. In the crowd, he was extremely eye-catching. The silver-clad man mused for a beat before opening, settle down first and then search. The crowd flew in the direction of Dongfu. 4 hours later, at the same location that the crowd of people had gathered, light flashed, and a crowd of black-clad people appeared. They were all wearing copper masks, the patterns on the masks extremely fierce and only revealing the eyes. Just in this area. Still not clear about the exact location. A black-clad person said. Then he made a sound of surprise. There were people just here, not an insignificant number. The leader of the crowd didn't say anything. He lightly waved his hand and the crowd of black-clad people disappeared into the air. A while later, a white-clad male appeared. If Zuemo could see it, he would be shocked to find that it was the person he had thought was a rich young master, Lin Qian. He only took a glance before disappearing. Zuomo's display in the sect assessment really shocked everyone. The next few days, there were continuous visitors. With no other solution, Zuemo could only hang up a sign of seclusion at the mouth of the valley. These few days, he had made Dan to the point he almost threw up. For eldest Shiji, for Su Yi Shixiang, to give to Liang Feng Shiji to sell. Only later did he remember that he didn't have any fire seeds himself. 4th grade fire source. If he didn't have one himself, why would he keep on making it? According to the appraisal, there was a probability that it could form golden crow fire. He speculated it was related to the number. Stealing his heart, Zuemo decided to make 500 for himself. In any case, it wasn't as though eating too much would kill him. If he could really form golden crow fire, then he really would have struck gold. 4th grade fire source. The grade of the Ling Dan that he made would increase a grade. Thinking of the possibility, he decided to just stay inside the Dan room. Su Qing was one of the busiest people around. She could almost be considered Zuemo's spokesperson. Each day, she needed to give Zuemo the Dan ingredients that had been prepared, and then had to help him distribute the golden crow pill. There wasn't much variance in the amount of golden crow pill that would be made each day, but who would get them? That was a major question. Zuemo, finding it a giant headache, threw the question to Su Qing. Previously, he owed her a favor. Zuemo was very willing to help her. The result of this action was that Su Qing's status in the sect instantly rose. She had been the first seed of the Fragrant Ginger Yard's outer sect disciples for a significant amount of time and was extremely good at managing different personal relations and knew how to observe expressions. This kind of person, who would easily offend her. And now that she had the power to divide the golden crow pill, everyone wouldn't dare to offend her at this time. The temptation of a 4th grade fire seed was too much. The only exception was Hao Min. Because of Zuemo, she found Su Qing even more of an eyesore. But when she thought about the strength he had shown in the sect assessment, she didn't dare to do anything. Zuemo had dared to slap her the previous time. If she provoked him, Zuemo definitely dared to slap her again. How could Su Qing not know that Zuemo was helping her? She was grateful inside and tried her best to finish everything beautifully. She had been shocked at Zuemo Shixiang's performance in the sect assessment, but what she really respected was Shixiang's craziness as he made Dan. She was very clear how much ingredients she would send in. Maybe, for outer sect disciples, talent was something that couldn't be found everywhere. But painstaking effort was something everyone could do and was more worthy of respect. Not just her, the entire Fragrant Ginger Yard had been frightened by Zuemo's frenzy. Even Shi Feng Rong had, on multiple occasions, called Su Qing in to ask about the situation. And Su Qing, within the limits of her power, gave Shixiang all the help she could give. Like when people asking for golden crow pills would give something like ling grains or vegetables, Su Qing would especially get a shimmy skilled in making food to make ling food and send it to Zuemo. And then, she quickly found that Zuemo would make a few more extra golden crow pills. She knew that helping her out. For the first time in almost 20 days, Zuemo walked out of the Dan room. Pushing open the door, he narrowed his eyes instinctively against the sun. Su Qing, rushing about in the yard preparing ingredients, saw the situation and ran over. Shixiang. It's nothing. I'm coming out to take a breather. Suemo motioned for her to do what she needed. After furiously making Dan for almost 20 days, he finally completed the majority of his debts and could take a breath. The sun splashing on his body was warm. Suemo felt extremely comfortable. He ran over to ask Su Qing, "Do you have a sound tablet?" Su Qing was slightly puzzled but still ran to a room and took out a sound tablet to give to Suemo. Taking the tablet, he disregarded the surprised expressions of the shimmy and jumped onto the roof. Adding Ling energy into the sound tablet, he set it by his side and then laid down, sunning himself and humming a tune. It had been so long since he was this free. Suemo was extremely relaxed. Just as he relaxed, it suddenly darkened. Stopping his humming, Suemo opened his eyes. In the sky overhead, a gigantic ship slowly flew past. The size of the large boat was about the same as the 1,000-wing ship that Suemo had seen before. But the bow was even more sharp, the main body of the ship surrounded by a crowd of beautifully colored birds. Suemo sat up. Face tilted upward to look at the large ship, he searched for what possible large personage that had come to Dongfu. This large ship had alarmed many people. The female disciples in the yard stopped what they were doing and held a discussion. Coincidentally coming out, Shi Fengrong noticed the large ship and a strange flicker flashed across her eyes. Her mouth scolded, "Stop being noisy." Hearing Shi Fengrong's reproach, everyone instantly became silent and started their work again. Shi Fengrong then scolded Suemo, who was on the roof, "Go make Dan." Finishing, she left in the direction of Wukong Hall. Suemo didn't care about being scolded. Inside, he was speculating, did the big ship have a relation with the sect? He felt that Master's expression today wasn't normal. There definitely was something. Of course, he could only speculate. Don't think that Master was just a woman. With her cultivation of Jin Dan, in Dongfu, that was definitely in the first-class people. Even if something had happened, he couldn't do anything to help. It was good if he didn't make trouble. Thinking about it, Suemo strolled back to his own little yard. He first went to inspect the ice cloud grass. Seeing vigorous growth, he meditated for 4 hours in the rock room. Due to the Ling vein in the rock room and the Ling food Su Qing had provided, the increase in Suemo's cultivation recently was extremely clear. It would just be a while before he would reach the second level of Zhuji. Because he had been busy with making Dan, he hadn't read the jade scroll that Xian Yen Shirbua had given him. The Ling grasses and herbs in the Ling fields had also been neglected recently. The Jinji outside the valley needed to be set up again. He still needed to keep making golden crow pills. He yearned very much for the 4th level golden crow fire. Busy, busy. He liked this kind of busyness. His life was very full. He suddenly thought that it had been a long time since he went into his consciousness to see Pu Yao. He didn't know what the other had been doing. Entering the sea of consciousness, it still looked normal. Suemo couldn't help but release a breath. What he was most afraid of was that there would be changes every time he came here. And no matter what changed, he wouldn't understand. But when he saw Pu Yao's state, he was alarmed. Chapter 69, Suemo drooling at an inconspicuous residence within Dongfu. Stars in daytime is caused by the most powerful Yama. It is used to ease their absorption of star power during the day by forcing the world to twist, and give them access to energy from the stars. The one who spoke was the silver-clad man. He continued in a grave tone, only when they have no choice would a Yama do such a thing. It seems the situation of this Yama isn't good, it is very possible they are seriously wounded and need star power to recover, so they were forced to twist the world. As he spoke, his voice relaxed and the others relaxed their expressions. A Yama able to create stars in daytime, they definitely are one of the strongest Yama. They've only ever appeared in the war 3,000 years ago. I hadn't thought that there would be such a powerful Yama hidden away here. He sighed. So what if he's powerful? Isn't he still going to end up in our hands? The yellow-robed Taoist said in a screeching voice, he, the heart of a sky Yao or black Missouri, if it is added into the sword, my flying sword would increase quite a few levels. Ha, the eyes of this Yama is very rare. It naturally can see through anything. The crowd instantly became excited as though they had already caught that amazing Yama. For Xiuzha, a high-level Yama's body was a treasure. Almost all the body parts could be used for forging or dan-making and were all rare items. This group had gathered together for this Yama. A powerful Yao who was seriously wounded was a prey that they all coveted. Seeing everyone's mood, the silver-clad man cautioned, "Everyone, we shouldn't rejoice preemptively. Haven't you realized that there are many other people after it as well? So what if there are others? Who dares to compete with us?" The yellow-robed cultivator said irritably in a high voice, murderous intent thick in his eyes. Viciousness flashed in the eyes of the other people. The silver-clad man said, "Everyone should have seen that ship today. A 6th-grade treasure ship, it is a rare talisman. If anyone had taken a close look at the tail of the wing boat, you should have seen their emblem." "Whose emblem?" The yellow-robed Taoist said suspiciously. When he saw that winged boat today, even he had been slightly shocked. "The master of bright wave Jie." The silver-clad male said slowly. Everyone instantly became silent as terror made its way across many of their faces. The expression of the yellow-robed Taoist also changed slightly, but he quickly recovered and shrieked, "Don't speak nonsense." The master of bright wave Jie had been in seclusion for over 60 years. How could he come to a little place like Sky Moon Jie? I only saw the emblem. In the past, I had spent some time in bright wave Jie and remember the emblem. The silver-clad male said calmly. Seeing the terror on everyone's faces, he said with a smile, "Everyone, don't worry too much. The master of bright wave Jie has not involved himself in common affairs for many years. It's unlikely that he came. Most likely it is his disciple or subordinate." The faces of everyone else relaxed. One of them said, "As long as it isn't the master of bright wave Jie, I'm not afraid." "Yes, yes." The other people agreed. Why would bright wave Jie interfere in this matter? The yellow-robed cultivator's brow furrowed. "Elder, don't forget, Sky Moon Jie is under the jurisdiction of bright wave Jie. This little brother knows that stars in daytime occurred, then it isn't strange that they would also know." The silver-clad male said. Suddenly the faces of the yellow-robed Taoist and the silver-clad male changed slightly and they yelled simultaneously, "Who?" The two rushed outside like a sword. There was nothing outside in the yard. The yellow-robed Taoist flew into the sky and scanned the surroundings before returning. He shook his head at the silver-clad male. Both of them had serious and solemn expressions, nothing remained of their previous ease. The other people all ran out to ask about the situation. By now, the two had resumed their normal expressions. The silver-clad male said, "Nothing, nothing, just a false alarm." Hearing this, the people released a breath and conversed as they walked back into the room. The yellow-robed Taoist followed last. Before re-entering, he glanced back before following. A moment later, in a shadowed corner, a figure silently appeared. It was the white-clothed Lin Qian. He revealed a pondering expression before disappearing. In the Dong Fu Hall, everyone had gathered together. Tian Songzi, as the local leader, sat at the head with Yu Bai standing by his side. Below him, 6 people sat and leisurely drank tea. "This time, we are really troubling you." The one that spoke was a beautiful matron. Clear eyes, white teeth, and extremely graceful. On her shoulder, there was a little light yellow bird that curiously examined the others. "Yun Xia Xianzi, too, is too courteous," Tian Songzi said with a laugh, "to have so many fellow experts come to my humble place, this one is very honored." "It is a little place. If there is something that we cannot fulfill, well, everyone, please forgive us. It will be fine." Everyone raised their hands in a greeting. Tian Songzi's expression was worried as he continued, I'm not going to conceal it from everyone. Since the appearance of stars in daytime, my heart hasn't felt steady. I may be inexperienced, but I do know that this isn't any kind of a good omen. I feel much more secure now that everyone has come today. You don't need to worry. Yun Xia Xianzi comforted, Master Yuan is skilled at detecting presences and is very sensitive to Yaoma. He will definitely find where the Yaoma is hiding. At this point, Master Yuan hurriedly said, Yun Xia Xianzi is too complimentary. While respectfully standing to side, Yu Bai was very shocked inside. The people sitting here all had significant cultivation. The one that attracted his attention the most was the little girl who had been sitting with a bowed head at the end. Her age appeared almost the same as his, but her cultivation was indecipherable to him. He who had always been proud of his accomplishments felt uncomfortable inside. There were too many geniuses in this world. Pu Yao looked extremely poor. He sat on the gravestone, his face was pale and appeared to be exhausted like a flickering lamp. Suemo instantly was scared. The invincible Pu Yao, why was he suddenly in this state? Suemo carefully went closer. Pu, what's going on? Pu Yao opened his eye to look at Suemo. His voice was very calm, and just as confident as usually, and asked in exchange, what? Suemo noticed that Pu Yao's alluring crimson blood eye was much fainter than usual, and even his voice seemed weaker. But for some reason, when he heard Pu Yao's confident voice, Suemo felt safe. Is it that you don't have enough Jingshi? Suemo couldn't help but ask in concern. He didn't know why he was so concerned about Pu Yao. Logically, the other was a Yaoma. The earlier he died the better, but seeing Pu Yao's state, Suemo couldn't help but ask in concern. Looking at Suemo again, Pu Yao seemed to be surprised by Suemo's question. Want to help me? Pu Yao's eyebrow rose. Suemo muddled a response noncommittally. He had learned. Pu Yao suddenly smiled, I'll take you to a place. Pu Yao proceeded to take out a few pieces of Jingshi. On the ground, he began to make a seal formation that Suemo had never seen before. Suemo might have never seen the seal formation, but this Jingshi, he was familiar with, wasn't it? He touched his body and his expression changed. This damned Ren Yao, he took my Jingshi again. Before he could speak, light suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. He couldn't help but close his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he was dumbstruck. Pu, where is this? He stammered his question. It was dark and shadowy in front of him. He could feel cold granite under his feet. What was flowing in a nearby stream was fresh red blood. Was this hell? Suemo forced himself to swallow, his mind tense as he looked at the surroundings. Pu Yao groaned in pleasure. He spread out his arms, his face intoxicated, completely void of his previous exhaustion. Sword Cave. Pu Yao returned to his lazy state. He stuck out his bright red tongue, his eyes bright as he licked his lips. There are many souls here. Such delicious souls. Sword Cave. Suemo blanked. He had lived in Wukong Sword Sect for 2 years and he had heard of the Sword Cave before. Wasn't Wei Xing Shixiang in the Sword Cave? He wasn't afraid anymore and curiously looked at the surroundings. He asked Pu Yao worriedly, Wei Xing Shixiang is also in the Sword Cave. Would he encounter us? If he encountered Shixiang, he couldn't even protest his innocence. This Sword Cave has 18 levels. Pu Yao was full of disdain as he looked at Suemo. Your Wei Shixiang has already descended to the 16th level. If you had half the ability of your Shixiang, would I be in this sorry state? As he spoke, he became angry. A Sky Yao, falling to such a level. So embarrassing. Seeing Pu Yao acting like normal, for some reason, Suemo relaxed significantly. He instantly went at it with Pu Yao, sneering, none of my business. What Sky Yao, weren't you wounded by my Shibwa? Aren't you only able to bully the greenhorn Zhuji cultivators like me? He quickly corrected, wrong, Ji was only Lianqi at the time. And you dare to speak of it? Pu Yao wasn't angry and laughed, this place is good. There's a lot of yin energy, and it's so comfortable. There are even souls. Although they are incomplete souls, but it's better than nothing. How did you find this place? Zhuo was very curious. This sword cave was kept secret. He had stayed here for 2 years but didn't know where it was, yet Pu Yao was able to find it. He had heard that it required 2 Jindan cooperating to open the sword cave. Pu Yao was able to easily enter. This guy still has some ability, Zhuo thought. Pu Yao said disdainfully, in just this tiny Wukong sword sect I knew after taking a single look. He then said to Zhuo, in the future, we will come visit this place occasionally. Come here. Zhuo's eyes widened. He shook his head without any hesitation, no way, do you know how much Jingshi you spent today? 4 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi. 4 pieces. Do you know how many golden crow pills I need to make to earn 4 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi? You spent it so easily. Pu Yao was full of disdain, that only shows you're trash. Earning Jingshi like you're giving birth. Meeting such a trash like you, Zhuo didn't hesitate to interrupt, also full of disdain as he said, if you can do it, you go earn it. Aren't you a Sky Yao? What? A Sky Yao, but you have to extract Jingshi from me, like that's something to be proud of. As he spoke, it was like the accumulated anger had suddenly erupted. Gu had worked so hard to earn the Jingshi with sweat and blood. Good for you, you just swiped it all away without a sound. You're freeloading. Gu hasn't even asked you for rent and you charged me for each lesson. You even started to take Jingshi for each experience of sword essence, aren't you embarrassed? Zhuo righteously listed Pu Yao's offenses. Pu Yao was dumbstruck. The reality proved it. Even the most powerful Yaoma, facing the even stronger tongue, they would also become dumbfounded. After Zhuo ranted for 5 minutes he then stopped in satisfaction. That felt good. After a long while, Pu Yao finally recovered. He tilted his head in thought and said, all right then, I'll teach you a little technique that can earn Jingshi. Zhuo's mind instantly became alert and he went over, what technique? Yun is cloud, Xia is red cloud. Immortal, goddess. Misogyny in Xianxia, the titles of females are usually Xianzi, while males get Daoren, Zhenren, etc. Chapter 70, the Yin bead Zhuo concentrated as his hands moved according to Pu Yao's instructions, his hands moved like fluttering butterflies and activated the spell. The benefits of consistently practicing, art of flora, was evident in the fluid motions of his fingers. This spell, which Pu Yao called art of concentrating yin, was complicated but it wasn't too difficult for Zhuo. Zhuo felt the yin energy in the surroundings stir. The energy was saturated with a dark and cold presence causing all the hair on his body to stand on end, but he gritted his teeth and persisted. The yin energy continued to gather in his hands. After the last movement was completed, a gray-white bead condensed in Zhuo's hands. Zhuo curiously examined the bead. Pu, what is this? The bead was a dirty white color, extremely plain, and felt cool in his hands. This is a yin bead, created through concentrating yin energy. It can be used in dan making or forging. The effect is especially beneficial for yin attribute talismans. Pu Yao's expression was smug as he glanced at Zhuo disdainfully. The yin energy in this place is very abundant. As long as you do not slack off, and make a few more each day, Jingshi will naturally roll in. What I think is you should change your sect. I have never seen such a poor sect. In your sect, other than that Shixiang of yours, everyone is just trash. Zhuo volleyed back. You, a so-called Sky Yao that was wounded by my second Shibua, you have the face to say this? Pu Yao snorted icily, if I hadn't been forged under the tower for 3,000 years and my spirit terribly wounded, how could a Jindan trash cut me? He was extremely disgruntled. Zhuo followed with an icy snort, I finally understand how you became a sky Yao. Pu Yao blanked. How? You about it. Zuemo couldn't resist and roared with laughter, pointing first at Pu Yao and then pointing at the sky. A Yao, blowing up into the sky, becomes a sky Yao. Ha 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 ha. I'm too lazy to even pay attention to you. Pu Yao wasn't angry. He spread his arms, and there wasn't any movement, but the yin energy suddenly started to move. He was like the eye of a horrifying whirlpool, the yin energy in the surroundings to rush toward him. Are you sure that this thing is really worth money? Not paying attention to Pu Yao, Zuemo started at the yin bead on his hand and asked with uncertainty. Pu Yao, who had been enjoying the experience of absorbing yin energy, felt a vein in his forehead start to throb. His movements suddenly stopped and he almost choked in annoyance. Since Pu Yao said that the yin bead was very valuable, Zuemo held a trustful attitude. He decided to make a few more, but he found that all the yin energy in this area was all pulled towards Pu Yao. He couldn't manage to form a yin bead and had to move to another location further away. Luckily, there was only one path in the sword cave. Zuemo didn't need to worry about getting lost. After walking for a while, finding that he wasn't affected by Pu Yao any longer, he started to make yin beads. It wasn't too difficult to make yin beads. The finger motions were slightly complicated, but to Zuemo it wasn't a problem. In one go, he made about 20 beads before he stopped. After making the yin beads, Zuemo started to examine the surroundings. What aroused his curiosity the most was the blood river not far away. The river seemed to be composed of a sticky blood. There wasn't any sound of flowing. For some reason, Zuemo felt his heart tremble whenever he saw this silent river of blood. He picked up a rock from the ground and threw it into the blood river. It was as though the rock had landed in quicksand. It did not make a splash, it slowly sunk into the river. For your sake, don't touch it. It's blood fiends. Pu Yao's voice suddenly came from behind. He said with some regret, pity I'm not a blood Yao, otherwise this would be very beneficial. What are blood fiends? Zuemo couldn't help asking. You wouldn't understand even if I told you. Pu Yao never let a chance to mock Zuemo slip by. He scanned the surroundings and made a sound of surprise. Rationally, such a cruel place, there would be some malicious spirits like devilings. Why is it so clean? What are devilings? Zuemo asked again. Delicious things. Pu Yao's bright red tongue couldn't help run across his lips, while an expression of yearning flashed across his face. After searching for a long time, he was slightly dazed and sighed, your Shixiang is really too honest of a person. He actually didn't even spare one of them. It looks like it needs a while to recover. Refreshed, Pu Yao waved his hand at Zuemo. Let's go. Finishing, he threw out 4 pieces of jingsher. Zuemo's expression changed dramatically again. This time, he didn't even need to check his pocket as he wailed grievously, Pu Yao. The white light rose and his voice stopped. Returning to the little west wind yard, Zuemo wanted to cry. 8 pieces of 3rd-grade jingsher. Going there and back, so much was gone. Just like that, half of all the jingsher he had earned by furiously making Dan was gone. Don't look that sad, Pu Yao unconcernedly said with a face full of disdain. When you sell the yin beads, you'll get your costs back with profit. You really are trash. Just 8 pieces of jingsher, and you are this distraught. You really are making a profit. Entering the sword cave once, it requires 2 jindan trash to both be present. Using 8 pieces of 3rd-grade jingsher to invite 2 jindan trash, can you get a better bargain than that? Zuemo could do nothing. He could only pray that the 20 yin beads he had made would sell for a good price. He knew that the yin beads could not be sold through the sect. The origins of the yin beads wasn't clear. If he aroused the suspicions of the Shirbua, then no matter how many lives he had, he would still die. He decided to go sell them himself in Dongfu. To not attract attention, he didn't ride the gray-beaked goose, rather, he silently left the mountain. As he arrived at the outskirts of the mountain, he darted into the forest. When he came out, he appeared completely different. He had turned into a weak-looking man with a waxy complexion. In Elder Wei Nan's Jade Scrolls, there were endless methods of changing appearances and concealing one's tracks. Zuemo had picked a method that wasn't very difficult. This was the first time Zuemo put on a disguise. He was very curious and found it strange. Right now, he was regretful that the spirit traveling seal had been burnt. If he had the spirit traveling seal, he could save some time. His flying paper crane was too eye-catching, so he could only walk. Even though his cultivation had increased greatly, his body was still very weak. Exhausted, he arrived at Dongfu, after walking over the mountains and rivers. However, his thirst for Jingshi and his enthusiasm won over his weariness. Almost crawling, he stumbled into the free market. With great pain, he rented a mini-room. Zuemo set up a shop. Zuemo had been to the free market many times, but it was the first time that he was selling something. He didn't think about earning a profit. He would be grateful if he could just earn back the 8 pieces of third-grade Jingshi. He put out a price of half a third-grade Jingshi for each yin bead. He was very worried. He thought about how Pu Yao had boasted how good this thing was. At the very least it must be worth half a third-grade Jingshi. Of course, Pu Yao was full of disdain towards Zuemo's conduct. He snorted coldly, the honored yin bead, the meaning was implicit. After 6 hours had passed. The last golden rays of sunlight shone on Zuemo's face. This is the Jingshi rolling in. This is the thing you said was good. This is getting back profits along with cost. Honored yin bead. Zuemo was grieving as he demanded answers from Pu Yao. A whole entire afternoon, no one had even stopped in front of his mini-room. Up until now, Zuemo hadn't even sold 1 yin bead. He still had to pay the rent for the mini-room as well. Pu Yao also stared blankly. He muttered for a while, not knowing what to say. After a long time, his face was full of disbelief. He suddenly threw his hands up in exasperation. How is that possible? This is the yin bead. Yin bead. After 3,000 years, how can people not even want a yin bead? Seeing Pu Yao lose his composure, Zuemo didn't feel the heartache as much anymore. He had already started to accept this cruel reality. He snorted coldly, in the future, stop posturing like a Sky Yao. Look at the era, Sky Yao. 3,000 years, your things, they are relics, they have become obsolete. Understand? You made me excited for nothing. After a while, Ji will give it to the children to use as marbles. Pu Yao's expression was subdued. It was clear that this incident had dealt a harsh blow to him. At this time, a little girl passed by Zuemo's mini-room and suddenly stopped. Zuemo, who had been preparing to start criticizing Pu Yao again, suddenly stopped talking, and enthusiastically said, "Miss, do you want to buy? This is a good thing, yin bead, completely formed from pure yin energy. Can be taken anywhere. Cool in the summer, and has the effect of beautifying the complexion." The little girl looked like a maid. Hearing this, she laughed lightly. You really know how to advertise. Her brow suddenly creased, but these beads are too ugly. If it was rainbow-colored, Miss would definitely like it. Miss, don't just look at the outward appearance. The quality is very fine, look how round and heavy it is. In order to make his very first transaction, Zuemo completely had no shame. Seeing Zuemo actually promoting the yin beads like marbles, Pu Yao stared with a wide mouth, his gaze dull. Since you've said so much. I'll buy one. The little girl covered her mouth and laughed. She took out the Jingshi and bought one. Before she left, she urged him kindly, I see you are an honest person. In the future, you should sell reliable things. These gray beads, no one would buy them. Finishing, she turned and left. Zuemo collapsed to the ground. He had finally sold one, and it wasn't easy. Compared to him, Pu Yao's soul had been mortally wounded. His expression was dull, his complexion was gray. Seeing Pu Yao's state, Zuemo couldn't help but urge, it's nothing. Just business. Next time, we'll sell something else. At the least, making golden crow pills isn't bad. 3,000 years have passed, you need to adapt. One person and one Yao snuck back to the mountain. In a small yard in Dong Fu Hall. Miss, I'm back, a cheerful voice passed out from the door. Yunxia Xianzi's little yellow bird flew up and rushed at the door. Yunxia Xianzi was embroidering a handkerchief and made a sound of acknowledgement, her head not raising from her work. You brat, we just arrived and you instantly disappeared. Ha, a figure rushed in. It was the smiling and adorable little girl. The yellow bird flew around the little girl, chirping. The little girl said with a face full of helplessness to the yellow bird, Okay, Miss Yellow, Huang, I got you something good to eat. If Suemo heard this, he would definitely have spat up blood. The Miss Huang was really just a bird. Finishing, she took out a large pile of things and narrated, there is the 5-flower cake from the food pavilion, the lotus and lily crisps, 13 flavored sweets. This is the famous old Wang liquor. Don't drink too much, otherwise Miss will discipline you again. The yellow bird's eyes were gleaming. Suddenly, it saw a gray bead. Like an arrow, it rushed into the pile and picked up the gray bead. Huh, you like this bead? The little girl was very surprised. The yellow bird picked up the bead with its beak and flew Ito Yunxia Xianzi, placing the bead onto her handkerchief. When Yunxia Xianzi's eyes spotted on the bead, she exclaimed in surprise and she stopped what she was doing. Picking up the bead for a closer inspection, her expression couldn't help but change slightly. Xiao Yuan, where did the bead come from? Chui is used as boasting, but also means being blown as in blown away by the wind. Huang also means yellow. Chapter 71, A New Experiment, Bought it, Yunxia Xianzi's grave tone scared Xiao Huan. She stammered, I bought it for half a third-grade jingsher. At the free market. I felt the seller was very pitiful and bought one. Pitiful? Yunxia Xianzi's brow furrowed, half a third-grade jingsher. Yes, Xiao Huan hurriedly nodded her head, that person was so sad. A whole afternoon and he didn't even sell one. When he was promoting it to me, he really was so pitiful, so I bought one for Miss Yellow to play with. Miss, what is it? This is a yin bead. Yunxia Xianzi's face was grave as she explained, yin beads are made from yin energy and are very rare. The method to form yin beads is very unique. It has been lost for a long time. There are many uses for this yin bead. I know of one method to forge this into a yin thunder bead. It would be very powerful. That's strong. Xiao Huan almost couldn't believe it, but I felt that person was very sad. If yin beads are that powerful, why couldn't he sell it for half a third grade of jingsher? Ha! Therefore, you got a bargain, Yunxia Xianzi said. In this world, there are always some eccentric people that enjoyed tricking the world for amusement, but her tone was not confident. Miss, why don't you go with me to find the person again? I remember where he was. Xiao Huan hurriedly said, this way, Miss might be able to request the method to form the yin bead. If not, you could still buy all the yin beads. And, hearing this, Yunxia Xianzi quickly stood. After returning to the mountain, Zuemo started his dam-making job once again. The yin bead was just a little detour. He just mourned the loss of 8 pieces of third-grade jingsher for a while. But the effect of this incident was even greater to Pu Yao. Pu Yao was silent for quite a few days, but he didn't have a solution. After 3,000 years, things would have changed. At least, that was what Zuemo thought. Zuemo temporarily didn't have time to investigate the use of the yin beads. He had too many things he needed to do. The sales of the Golden Crow pills was very good, but that also meant he needed to spend more time on dan making. Especially in this situation where he needed jingsher. Even more, the temptation of the 4th-grade fire seed wasn't just for others. It was a temptation even for him as well. But after swallowing 50 Golden Crow pills, Zuemo didn't form Golden Crow fire. Each time, he could feel a sliver of heat absorbed into his body, and just as quickly, the heat was like melting ice, gone in the blink of an eye. This made him very suspicious of the effectiveness of the Golden Crow pill. Even though it was a Ling Dan that he made, but about its effectiveness, he wasn't confident at all. 50 Golden Crow pills. Converting that to Jingshi, it wasn't a small amount. His heart hurt slightly and he was puzzled. Was it that the sun essence inside the Golden Crow pill too little? The reason that the Golden Crow pill had been judged to be able to form Golden Crow fire was that it contained essence of the sun, but the amount was extremely small. If he wanted to rely on the pill to form Golden Crow fire, he didn't know how many he had to use. Suddenly, he was reminded of an idea he once had when he had been making the Golden Crow pills. If he used Art of Crimson Flame as the primary and the Li Fire Seal formation as the auxiliary, what would the Ling Dan he made be like? At the time, he had 3 different choices. This had been one of them. At the beginning, he had abandoned this plan of action because it changed the relationship between the primary and auxiliary fires, which would affect many other things. But now, he had enough time to think about resolving the problems. Also, after making Golden Crow pills all this while, he had accumulated rich experience. If he used that method to make Ling Dan, the amount of essence of the sun definitely wouldn't be small. He decided to try even though the chance of failure was very large. The creation of the first Golden Crow pill had been accidental. In the middle, he had experienced numerous failures, but the Golden Crow pill had also given him enormous profits. He had gotten a good taste. Deciding to move immediately, he went back into his Dan room. Without any doubt, his first time was a failure. Suemo once again smelt the familiar burnt smell. He wasn't downcast. Failure was within his expectations. And compared to last time, he was much richer. The ingredients of the fasting pill were all open for him to access. To use Art of Crimson Flame as the primary flame and the Li Fire Seal formation as the auxiliary flame. It appeared to be a simple change, but it resulted in extremely complicated changes. First, the balance in strength of Art of Crimson Flame and Li Fire Seal formation had to be adjusted. Also, it was unknown if the ingredients of the original recipe were strong enough to tolerate a larger amount of sun essence. Of the two, he was more concerned about the second point. How to pair ingredients and the ratios was a field of extremely deep study. Even his master didn't have a good grasp. He was worried that if the ratio had to be changed and it required higher-level Ling grasses, then would he be able to support it? Even with his steadily increasing wealth, if he went to buy the ingredients for Dan making, especially those high-level ingredients, then he could only be able to window shop. He began his dull experiments. He had a jade scroll by his hands that recorded down the general conditions of each of his attempts. He knew that he didn't have as much knowledge and experiences as his master. The only thing he could do was advance little by little, trying again and again. In the eyes of many others, this was certainly the dumbest method, but it was the only choice Suemo had. Just as Suemo was trying to make a new Ling Dan, Yunxia Xianzi and her maid, Xiao Huan were scouring the free market daily, trying to find that waxy-faced man who was selling marbles. In the following days, Suemo didn't make any progress. Pu Yao suddenly, of his own accord, said to Suemo, "I'll teach you to use the yin beads to forge something. Go sell it, it would definitely sell for a good price." "What?" Suemo asked inattentively. Right now, his head was entirely filled with how to make a new Ling Dan. Yin Thunder Bead. Pu Yao said confidently, "People may not recognize Yin beads, but Yin Thunder beads, people would definitely recognize it." Pu. Suemo decided to communicate with Pu Yao, 3,000 years. "Your things are the things from 3,000 years ago. No one knows of them now. If they don't know, then they won't buy it, and no one buying it means no Jingshi." Pu Yao said, unsatisfied, "Do you think everyone is as ignorant and shut off as you? And have you not heard of Yin Thunder beads before?" Looking at the stubborn Pu Yao who still wasn't accepting reality, Zuo shook his head, "Don't waste my time." Pu Yao raged, "Stop." Zuo turned around, "Don't say you're a Sky Yao." Pu Yao almost choked on air. Looking at Pu Yao's depressed expression, for some reason, Zuo felt good. The tiredness of the last few days seemed to have disappeared. He was smug as he went back into the Dan room and started a new round of experiments. After going to the Sword Cave once, Zuo's fear of Pu Yao seemed to have flown away in the span of one night. This kind of joke, he wouldn't have dared to make it before. After the sect assessment, Zuo seemed to have spent all his time on making Golden Crow pills. This directly caused the skill of his Art of Crimson Flame to have increased dramatically. It was a pity that without the Jade Scrolls of the next level, he still couldn't break through to the next level. Right now, he was able to easily manipulate the strength of the Art of Crimson Flame. As the reputation of the Golden Crow pill increased in Dongfu, it quickly became the trademark Lingdan of Wukong Sword Sect. To help Zuo in making Golden Crow pills, Yan Lusherbua had specially bought a second-grade Dan cauldron for Zuo. He was the envy of many other people. During the sect assessment, Zuo's reputation had increased with his spectacular performance. His opponent Luo Li had been wounded too, but he didn't have a master that could make Dan. Shi Fengrong was angry at Luo Li for going too far, and she treated him as though he was air. As a result, it took Luo Li's wounds a month to heal. When the news that eldest Shiji Gong Sun Qing, Su Yi, and Su Yi Xia went to see Zuo passed into his ears, Luo Li almost spat blood. The energies became unbalanced and his recovery was delayed for 10 days. During the time that Luo Li had been recuperating, other than the first few days, Hao Min didn't visit him or ask about him. The sect leader had visited him once, which had greatly moved Luo Li. After recovering, Luo Li instantly entered seclusion. He seemed to have suddenly disappeared. Everyone had discussed for a while before getting tired of it. Undoubtedly, other people's impressions of zombie Zuo Shixiang improved greatly. In Dongfu Hall, everyone had gathered together. However, no one's expression was good. Many days had passed but they still hadn't found anything. There were very few traces left from the stars in daytime. They couldn't detect the general location, and as time passed the traces that were left would decrease. Therefore, the chance that they would find the wounded Yao Ma would decrease as well. Dongfu is really too popular. There are too many energies that are moving through. The marks left from the event have dissipated, Yuan Li grimaced. He was the individual most skilled with detecting energies in this group. Everyone had high hopes pinned on him. But up until now, he wasn't able to even find a trace, and he felt embarrassed. Yunxia Xianzi comforted, "Mr. Yuan, don't rush. We are here to do our best and the rest is up to fate. Have you all noticed that, other than us, there seems to be another group that is trying to find the Yao Ma," a silver coronet cultivator said. "Oh, has Wentai Sanren found something?" Yunxia Xianzi couldn't help ask. "I keep on feeling that someone is following us in the dark. Has anyone else felt it?" Wentai Sanren said worriedly. "I have also had this feeling," Yuan Li nodded. Yunxia Xianzi's beautiful eyes scanned the surroundings. Seeing the assorted expressions, she couldn't help but sigh inside. If the Jia master was here, would they be like this? Everyone was about equal in their cultivation and they were all proud people. They usually cultivated alone. Coming here this time, most people were doing it out of obligation. Without a strong person to lead, they were like a pile of sand. "Old He, can you not just stare at the Lingdan? Have you found anything?" Yunxia Xianzi said with a smile. "Found? No, the one called Old He was an old man. His hair and beard were white, his skin wrinkled. He was skilled in the art of Dan making. He had been invited to come but he usually didn't speak. However, he was of profound and unknown cultivation and no one dared to underestimate him." He suddenly sighed, "Dongfu might be a small place but it still has some pearls." This golden crow pill, the maker was able to think of adding essence of the sun into the Dan. This old one admires them, what's the use? Yun Li's brows furrowed and he asked unconcernedly. It may be possible to form 4th grade golden crow fire, old he slowly drawled. Hearing this, everyone instantly quieted. Chapter 72, Seeing Guests, 4th grade golden crow fire. When Tai Sanren looked with disbelief at the little Ling Dan in old he's hands, I see that there isn't much Ling energy in this Ling Dan. It can't even enter 2nd grade. Can this really make golden crow fire? The other people also had varying levels of disbelief on their faces. A 1st or 2nd grade Ling Dan that was able to create a 4th grade golden crow fire sounded delusional. 4th grade golden crow fire was a rare fire seed that people dreamed of. Other than a few sects who had the methods of creating and capturing it, there basically was no other method of obtaining it. If a person could obtain 4th grade golden crow fire through consuming just one kind of Ling Dan, even if this Ling Dan was 4th grade, there would be countless people wanting to buy it. The people present were all Jin Dan Xiu. They knew very well that the gap between lower and higher grades wasn't something overcome through sheer numbers. This was also why the price difference between lower and higher grade items was enormous. But now they were hearing that a Ling Dan that didn't surpass 2nd grade Ling Dan, it could make golden crow fire. It was like hearing a joke. If the person who said it wasn't old he, the most skilled in Dan making among them, everyone would have thought that he was insane. This is a 1st grade Ling Dan, old he wasn't rushed and slowly said, it contains a sliver of essence of the sun. This essence of the sun, after the Dan was made, is warm and easy to manipulate. Theoretically, it has a possibility of forming golden crow fire. Of course, only theoretically. Only now did everyone release a breath, and they gave, it ought to be so, expressions. This amount, of sun essence, is too little. To form golden crow fire, if there wasn't tens of thousands of pills, it probably wouldn't happen. But even if this sun essence cannot form golden crow fire, but it is extremely young and pure. It is perfect for adding into other fire seeds. Everyone here naturally doesn't need it, but it is a very good present for the next generation, old he said with a smile. Hearing this, everyone nodded. Without an exception, they were all Jin Dan. If this could make golden crow fire, they would be interested. But if it was just essence of the sun, it wasn't very attractive to them. Those seated here were not roaming Xiu and they had many disciples, even if they were roaming Xiu they would still have disciples. The grade of golden crow pill was low, but that bit of sun essence, it could be added to all kinds of fire seed and elevate the grade of those fires. It is a very useful Ling Dan, and would be perfect to use in rewarding disciples. With old he's words, this is pretty good. Where can we buy this golden crow pill? Hearing that the Ling Dan contained a sliver of essence of the sun, she couldn't help but ask. The other people also waited to hear expectantly. Haha, it's a little sect called Wukong Sword Sect, old he turned to ask Tian Songzi, are you familiar with the sect? Tian Songzi was surprised to hear about Wukong Sword Sect. Hearing old he's question, he hurriedly answered, Wukong Sword Sect is usually low-key. If it wasn't for a recent incident, I wouldn't have noticed that there is a local sect this strong. How so? Yuan Li asked curiously. As a Jindan Shouja, Tian Songzi's cultivation wasn't weaker than them. And his branch had always held power in Dongfu. To be called a strong sect by him, the sect's power couldn't be underestimated. Seeing everyone show curiosity, Tian Songzi slowly narrated, speaking of Wukong Sword Sect, we have to mention the recent apparition. In this generation of Wukong Sword Sect, there is an amazing genius called Wei Sheng. This person is of low birth but is obsessed with the sword. To be able to cultivate the sword, he was willing to be a sword servant. After working and studying hard, he finally reached Juji. In his Juji, the sword essence flew into the heavens and rang into the surroundings. I personally saw it and went to look in the deep of the night. Only then did I discover that this Wukong sword sect merits great fame. Has anyone heard of Ice Dragon Sword? When Tai Sanren's expression changed, the Ice Dragon Sword, that shocked all of Yao Hunt in the past. The others also gave shocked expressions. Just the person, Tian Songzi nodded, I'm ashamed to admit it. If it wasn't that there had been an apparition when Wei Xing entered Juji, I wouldn't have known such an able person was in our Dong Fu. The golden crow pill that old he is speaking about was made by Wukong sword sect's Shi Feng Rong. She is of Jin Dan cultivation, and the most skilled in Dan making of Wukong sword sects for Jin Dan. Yu Bai was better informed on the topic than Tian Songzi, and he immediately followed. Master might not know, this golden crow pill wasn't made by Elder Shi, but her disciples Mo supposedly, it was an accident when he was just starting to learn. This disciple has pretty good talent in Dan making. Old he couldn't help but praise. Tian Songzi's expression couldn't help but change and suddenly blurted, this Wukong sword sect is really going to rise. Seeing the other people look at him, he explained, everyone may not know, this Sui Mo was unknown before but he managed to achieve a spring sprout jade metal with Lianqi cultivation, his talent is astounding. And in Lianqi, he also managed to comprehend sword essence. This talent is exceptionally amazing. I hadn't thought he would be so talented in Dan making. The heavens have really blessed Wukong sword sect. The other people also had expressions of agreement on their face. Of the 3 points that Tian Songzi mentioned, just one was enough for a person to be considered exceptional, but to have all 3 qualities in one person? That definitely was a once-in-a-100 years genius. Wukong sword sect, with an accomplished master like Ice Dragon Sword and geniuses like Wei Sheng and Zui Mo in the next generation, it was almost certain to have 100 years of prosperity. The people seated thought of their own sects and had different thoughts. Since Ice Dragon Sword is actually in Dong Fu, why don't we pay a him visit and order a batch of golden crow pills while we are at it, haha. What does everyone think? Old he said. In this group of people, he had the greatest interest in Wukong sword sect. The others all agreed. Everyone seated here was cunning. To build good relations with a sect that was going to prosper, the benefits in the future didn't need to be stated. Zui Mo was seated in front of the Dan cauldron with his 2 hands on the 8 trigrams plate. His expression was focused. A clear gold-colored light came down and landed in his hand before deflecting towards the Dan cauldron. He had reached the limits of what he could do with Art of Crimson Flame, and he reduced the Li fire seal formation to the smallest it could get. Inside the cauldron, a ball of medicine was enveloped by the golden light, boiling relentlessly as it floated in the air. The Li fire seal formation below released heat. Feeling the essence of the sun slowly merge into the liquid, Zui Mo suddenly increased his awareness. He knew that the most crucial time had come. The speed that the sun essence merged at was extremely slow at the beginning, but after entering the liquid, it would suddenly increase. It was important to carefully control the power of Art of Crimson Flame. If he wasn't careful, he would lose everything. Zui Mo had failed many times at this crucial juncture. Poof! A gray smoke suddenly appeared out of the boiling liquid. Zui Mo mentally thought it was going wrong, but before he could react, the liquid turned into a ball of ash. Damn it! Zui Mo sat dispiritedly. After continuously making Dan, his Ling energy was almost exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot and his expression tired. The Dan room was filled with the remnants of failed Dan, the smell was nasty. Up until now, he hadn't succeeded once. However, it wasn't as though he hadn't learned anything. Today, just in this last attempt, he finally found the problem. In the various kinds of materials for the fasting pill, there was one material that couldn't tolerate such a high intensity of sun essence. Sun essence might look light and small, but it was much stronger than the Li fire seal formation. This Ling grass called Thousand Jade Grass, it couldn't endure being processed by such a strong flame. He needed to find a Ling grass that could endure the increase in the essence of the sun, with similar attributes to Thousand Jade Grass. Zuemo couldn't help but have a headache. This was the problem that he was most worried about encountering. When it came to the attributes and the theory of the medicine, he was totally blind. He gave a sigh. It seemed that his idea would have to be realized in the future, but he was still unsatisfied inside. He decided to take a good look in Master's record room to see if he could find a ling grass similar in effect as Thousand Jade Grass. As he pondered, he walked out of the Dan room. Shi Xiang. Su Qing saw Zuemo walk out of the Dan room and her eyes brightened. She hurriedly came over. That big ship has come to our sect. Big ship? What big ship? Zuemo's mind was scattered and asked instinctively. Doesn't Shi Xiang remember? The big ship that had flew above us before. Su Qing reminded. The big ship that flew over. Zuemo suddenly shook and was startled away. That extremely intimidating ship had left a big impression on him. He hurriedly asked, "What's the ship doing here?" "Don't know." Su Qing shook her head. "They seem to be conversing very well with the Shirbois, but I heard that they were here investigating the stars in daytime." Stars in daytime? Zuemo felt his throat tighten. He suddenly thought of this term that the pink paper crane had also said to him. For some reason, he seemed to feel that this stars in daytime was connected to him. Did Shi Xiang forget? Oh, right, I remember. Shi Xiang had been in Zhuji that day. In a piteous tone, she said, "Pity that Shi Xiang hadn't seen it. Stars coming out in daylight, it's very rare." Zuemo felt that his body was slightly cold. If before, he had just felt that it was connected to him, then now he was certain that this stars in daytime was definitely connected to him. How could there be such a coincidence? Just him, he definitely wouldn't connect the apparition with himself. He couldn't, but Pu Yao could. Thinking about it, he left Su Qing and quickly went back into the Dan room. Entering the Dan room, Zuemo entered his sea of consciousness. Pu Yao was idly listening to the sound tablet. "Pu, that stars in daytime, did you cause it?" Zuemo felt his voice was trembling. "Me?" Pu Yao didn't even blink and crisply shook his head, "No." Zuemo instantly released a breath. Pu Yao might have many flaws, but he never refused to admit what he did. But Pu Yao's following words frightened Zuemo half to death. "Not me, it was you." "Me?" Zuemo pointed at his own nose and asked dumbly. "Humph, a certain dead ghost needed star energy and borrowed your body." Pu Yao was clearly laughing at his misfortunes. "At that time, I already said, he went way over." Zuemo's head was in the clouds. He stammered, "You mean, there's someone else here?" Before Pu Yao could reply, Zuemo heard someone knocking on the door. "Shi Xiang, the sect leader is requesting for you to go to Wukong Hall. There are guests that want to meet you." Chapter 73, Inspiration in an Emergency. Zuemo, finding inspiration in an emergency, gave a horrific wail and then collapsed on the ground. Outside the Dan room, the disciple heard Zuemo's wail and asked panicked, "Shi Xiang. Shi Xiang. Are you all right?" There wasn't a response. Su Qing, who had been paying attention to the situation, hurriedly ran over and yelled across the door, "Shi Xiang. What is it? Are you all right?" There still wasn't a response from inside. Su Qing instantly became extremely worried and, disregarding that she might be scolded, opened the Dan room and saw Zuemo unconscious on the ground. Su Qing was shocked but didn't mess up. She crisply yelled at the disciple who had come to ask for Zuemo, "Go tell the sect leader." That disciple, frightened out of his wits, ran outside. In Wukong Hall, Pei Yuan ran and the others were attending to Yunxia Xianzi's group. This group coming to visit Wukong Sword Sect really was giving face to Pei Yuan Ran and the others. Naturally, Pei Yuan Ran and the others were courteous and warm. Both guest and host were extremely amiable. So many Jindan Xiuzhe, not just in Dongfu, but even in Sky Moon Jia, it was an extremely grand group of people. For the disciples that were serving at the side, other than staring with wide eyes and a gaping mouth, they felt extremely honored. Before Wei Sheng had Juji, Wukong's sword sect hadn't been known in Dongfu. Now, even a group of the strong masters of Bright Wave Jia had lowered themselves to visit the sect. No other sect had received such honor in Dongfu. Maybe, in all of Kunlun Jing, Bright Wave Jia wasn't anything. But it governed 31 small Jia, including Sky Moon Jia. Even the strong masters from Bright Wave Jia were so respectful to Xian Yan Shishu. Only now did the disciples know the cold and taciturn Xian Yan Shishu was so strong. In their eyes, their sect became even more mysterious. Conversation flowed across Wukong's sword sect. After confirming Xian Yan's identity, Yunxia Xianzi and the others deliberately started to attempt to win him over. They were very disappointed that Wei Sheng was unable to come out of the sword cave. Not being able to meet Wei Sheng, the one rumored to have created an apparition on Juji, it still wasn't a waste of time if they could meet the Zhua Mo who had so many talents. For some people, like old He, their interest in Zhua Mo far surpassed their interest in Wei Sheng. At this time, the disciple that had gone to call Zhua Mo scrambled in, "Oh no, oh no." Pei Yuan Ran's brows furrowed in dissatisfaction. He asked in a deep voice, "What are you panicked about?" Seeing the displeasure of the sect leader, the disciple was even more nervous and stammered, "Sect leader." "Zhua Mo Shixiang fainted." Hearing this, Shi Fengrong suddenly stood up. "What happened?" "Say it slowly." Pei Yuan Ran shouted. His voice carried clear sound incantation. Everyone felt their minds become clear and couldn't help but mentally compliment Pei Yuan Ran on his cultivation. Suffering the shout, the mind of the outer sect disciple suddenly cleared up. His voice became clear and words simple. Zhua Mo Shixiang had been dan-making for a few days without rest and his mind was fragile. When this disciple was reporting to Shixiang, this disciple suddenly heard a shout from the dan room. There wasn't a response when this disciple asked the next few times. Su Qing Shiji opened the door and found Shixiang unconscious on the ground. When this disciple saw him, Shixiang's complexion was terribly unwell. It must have been many days since he came out of the dan room. Hearing this, Shi Fengrong stood, "Everyone, please excuse me." Finishing, she started to hurry towards Fragrant Ginger Yard. At this time, Pei Yuan Ran raised his hands in an apology. This one's shimmy is worried about her disciple and lost her composure. "Please, excuse her. Sect leader Pei is too serious. If our sect had such geniuses, as elders, we would be the same." Old He said. The others nodded in agreement. "Yes, your sect really has good fortune. In my sect, the disciples are average and have no great accomplishment. Every time I think of it, I cannot sit still and fears that the fires of the sect will extinguish with my generation. Then it would truly be an unpardonable crime." Yuan Li couldn't help but add. Everyone felt great empathy with Yuan Li's words. Pei Yuan Ran had a joyful expression. In the beginning, he and the others had felt the same as Yuan Li, sect leader Pei. Old He picked his words and said, "To be able to make golden crow pills just as he has started to learn dan-making, your sect's disciple has great talent in dan-making. This old man has rarely seen anything like it in these many years." He then sighed, "These many years, this old man has seen many outstanding talents. Growing older, this one has found that all things are the same. With talent, one always tried to extract things from it, and this causes many geniuses to falter and die early, their progress is troubled. Sect leader Pei needs to take great care. I had to speak my mind. If I have offended, sect leader Pei, please bear with me." Hearing this, Pei Yuan Ran was shocked. He stood and gave a deep bow to old He, the concerned words of old He, "How can this one not know? This one will remember deep in the heart." Xian Yan and Yan Lu also gravely stood and made a bow towards old He. The mood of Wukong Hall became tense. Old He's words had stirred the thoughts of many people. Every sect would have some outstanding disciples, but just like old he had said, these talented disciples all had troubled fates. After such an incident had occurred, everyone didn't have the interest in conversing, and after ordering a batch of golden crow pills, they made their farewells. When Shifeng Rong rushed back to Fragrant Ginger Yard and saw Zuomo's pitiful state, she forcefully swallowed back the words of rage that had reached her mouth. But there was still barely disguised fury in her voice. From today, for 1 month, you are not allowed to enter the Dan room. Zuomo grimaced inside. Not being allowed to enter the Dan room for a month meant that, for a month, he didn't have any source of income. Almost all of his income right now came from making golden crow pills. The ling grasses and herbs in the ling fields, other than the kind of plants like snowy foxtail grass that could not be used in Dan making, he had planned on leaving the rest of the plants for him to use. But thinking that he had temporarily managed to keep his life, Zuomo felt glad inside. Facing the furious master, Zuomo was very unconfident and could only mutter in agreement. Coldly glancing over Zuomo, Shifeng Rong left behind a few restorative ling dan before leaving. Zuomo was very moved. Master might be of many cold words and faces, but she really was concerned about him. Before, he had felt unfortunate that he had such a foul-tempered master, but he now felt that his luck wasn't so bad. When Shifeng Rong rushed back to Wukong Hall, the guests had left. Pei Yuanran and the other two were sitting silently in Wukong Hall. Having been waiting for Shifeng Rong, Pei Yuanran repeated Old He's words to her. Shifeng Rong also had a worried expression. If it wasn't for Old He's reminder today, we have all missed this problem. Pei Yuanran said gravely, thinking about it now, we were truly too impatient. It was the same for Wei Xing entering the sword cave. And it happened for Zuomo's Dan making. I have already restricted him from Dan making for a month. Shifeng Rong suddenly said, this matter, it was my fault for missing it. Pei Yuanran waved his hand, we were all at fault. Yes. Yen Le had a regretful expression, the sales of Golden Crow Pill were too good. I got impatient because they were urging me and went to rush him. Thinking about it now, earning Jingshi is for the continued existence of the sect. If something happened to Zuomo because of this matter, it really is a loss. We'd have lost a lot. It's good to restrict him from Dan making. Pei Yuanran said solemnly, Shidi, supervise him in this time to practice the sword. We aren't going to hope that he would make any accomplishment on the sword. His talent isn't bad in the sword, but he has too many likes, and it's hard for him to be faithful to one. If there aren't any surprises, his achievements in the sword wouldn't be as good as Wei Xing. Everyone had achieved Jindan and could easily see this. Even Shifeng Rong nodded her head slightly. Zuomo started out as a ling plant farmer. Then he learned Dan making followed by the sword. What he had learned was extremely broad. He wasn't willing to throw away any of it, so his achievements on the sword would most likely be very limited. But Zuomo's other talents are truly outstanding. If he isn't learning Dan making with Shimi, his talent in Dan making would be lost. We won't hope for him to cultivate the sword. We could nurture his interest in other areas, like second Shidi's forging, we could try. Pei Yuanran continued, but Old He's words reminded me today. Zuomo's body is too weak. We might not put expectations on his sword skills, but we could strengthen his body and prevent something like becoming unconscious in the future. Before his body is strong, don't let him sink back into Dan making. Second Shidi, this will have to rely on you. Yes. Xian Yen spat out a word. In the half-lidded eyes, 2 dots of cold light flashed. No one had any opinions about Pei Yuanran's arrangements. Even Shifeng Rong felt that not letting Zuomo sink into Dan making temporarily was a correct choice. After everyone had left, a hint of worry came onto Pei Yuanran's face. Zuomo had a problem, then Wei Xing. He was slightly regretful now of sending Wei Xing into the sword cave so early. In the dark and gloomy sword cave, Wei Xing's clothes were dyed with blood, blood coming out of the corner of his mouth. His upper half was bare, large and small marks crisscrossing, alarming to see. Opposite to his dim and tired mental state, splitting rainbow was glowing and flashing on his hands. It was like the rainbow after the rain, the color vibrant and fresh. Wei Xing affectionately caressed the body of the sword. The seven-colored sword hummed lightly, as though it was responding to him. In total, there were 18 levels in the sword cave. Starting from the first level, he had fought his way down step by step. The devilings along the way, he hadn't let go of even one. There wasn't any slacking or tricks. Even though he already knew that Void Sword Scripture was on the 18th level, if he could reach the 18th level, he would be able to see the greatest art the sect founder had left behind, Void Sword Scripture. But he controlled the impulse in his heart. Steady step by steady step, one deviling after the next, he forged his sword essence. He was the very first second-generation disciple in Wukong's sword sect to comprehend sword essence, even earlier than Zuemo. He had naturally comprehended it at Juji. The sword essence he had comprehended by himself, it wasn't from any kind of sword scripture, but from his daily continuous fights, his own understandings which formed his own sword essence. His sword essence, it wasn't an understanding of the sword scriptures, but an understanding of the sword. This was also why Xian Yen found it troublesome and hard to teach him. This was also why, no matter if it was the stubborn Xian Yen or the steady Pei Yuan Ran, they were all in favor of sending him to the sword cave. They had high expectations of him. Wei Xing, who had his own sword essence, he wasn't just the person in the sect most likely to grasp Void Sword Scripture, but the only one with hopes of reaching the level that the founder had attained. Even though Zuemo had comprehended sword essence, but in the hearts of the elders, Wei Xing's talents at the sword was much higher than him. Wei Xing gently caressed the sword, his eyes resolute. His cultivation had rose furiously and in a short amount of time, reached the 8th level of Juji. But what he didn't know was that, of the past disciples that entered the sword cave, those that could enter the 8th level, none of them were below Ningmai. And him, just with his Juji cultivation, fought and killed his way to the 16th level. Starting from the 13th level, every step that he took, he needed to pay a price. But he didn't become afraid and retreat. His sword, there was no retreat, there was no hesitation. Chapter 74, Nightmare. Zuemo wasn't get upset when he was restricted from Dan making for a month. To escape from imminent life-threatening danger or to make Dan for a month, it wasn't a difficult choice to make. However, when informed that his ban would be endlessly extended by his master until he satisfactorily completed Xian Yen Shirbu's exercise training, Zuemo became dumbstruck. To meet with the visiting Jin Dan masters was a calamity, and to receive Xian Yen Shirbu's torture was another calamity. If Zuemo had a choice, he would unhesitatingly choose the first calamity. He didn't know the strength of those Jin Dan masters, but he had directly experienced Xian Yen Shirbu's strength. He now knew what being too smart for your own good was. Master, who had always pushed him to make Dan, had suddenly reversed her position and sent down a strict order for him to go to Xian Yen Shirbu for special training. Before she left, she had sternly warned him, if he dishonored her in front of Xian Yen Shirbu, when she came back, it was humph humph. Master's humph humph was almost as scary as second Shirbu's terrifying stare. Master had never explained what her humph humph really was, but the smile that accompanied each humph humph caused Zuemo to shiver and his hair raise up. Certain that he was marching into the jaws of death, Zuemo went to Xian Yen Shirbu's grass hut. On the way there, he warned Pu Yao countless times. Pu Yao definitely was one to hold grudges. Second Shirbu had attacked him. With this guy's ungenerous attitude, he was definitely thinking of getting revenge. Pu Yao was arrogant and wanted to reclaim his honor, saying that it was because he had been previously wounded that he had been defeated by Second Shirbu. Zuemo was celebrating the fact that Pu Yao hadn't recovered from his wounds yet, otherwise, he definitely would be making another mess. Didn't he know that this was a different era? After the incident with the Yin bead, Zuemo had no fear of Pu Yao anymore. What Sky Yao, it was clearly an old antique that was still living in the time 3,000 years ago, and completely cut off from the present. So pitiful. Sometimes, Zuemo couldn't help but pity Pu Yao. From what he saw, Pu Yao was clearly still living in the illusions of the past, and didn't want to face the cruel reality. Anyone who had been imprisoned for 3,000 years, they would probably behave the same way when they came out. Zuemo thought that the incident of the yin beads had dealt a great blow to Pu Yao. This Ren Yao had been dispirited for quite a few days. Afterwards, Pu Yao had offered many other things that could be used to make money, but Zuemo had sympathetically yet resolutely rejected them. Regardless of sympathy, in order to avoid trouble, Zuemo sternly warned Pu Yao. Zuemo had initially used second Shibwa to threaten him, but seeing that there wasn't an effect, he immediately changed to using the threat of Jingshi. That was instantly effective. Pu Yao was a great consumer of Jingshi. Zuemo didn't know how Pu Yao could use up so much Jingshi. But clearly, Pu Yao had at least an additional source of consumption, going to the sword cave. Pu Yao was extremely desirous of yin energy, and in this area, only the sword cave had it. Zuemo found that he had the feeling that he was raising a pet. Coming to the sunset lookout peak for the second time, the sword essences in the ground surrounding the grass hut seemed to recognize him and had completely disappeared. Second Shibwa. He shouted. Come in. Second Shibwa's icy words came out from behind the wooden door. Zuemo seemed to see, behind the wooden door, second Shibwa sitting in the lotus position, his body as large as a mountain, casting a shadow over him. Feeling weak and fragile, he barely raised his head and was only being able to see a pair of indifferent and frigid eyes staring at him. Zuemo couldn't help but shudder. He forced himself to throw away his delusions and calmed his mind. He pushed open the door and gathered his bravery to walk in. Sit. Second Shibwa didn't open his eyes. Just like last time, he was sitting on a meditation mat. The sunlight came in through a hole in the roof and landed on his body. Zuemo saw the meditation mat in front of second Shibwa and carefully sat down, lowering his head and listening hard. Starting from today, I will teach you. Xian Yen Shibwa's body was thin and withered, but sitting there with closed eyes, he seemed to weigh 1,000 catties, suppressing Zuemo so much he almost couldn't breathe. He didn't speak in a loud voice, but when it landed in Zuemo's ears, it was like thunder. Yes. Zuemo weakly responded. Even now, he didn't understand why Master and the sect leader suddenly thought of throwing him to second Shibwa. Our sect cultivates the sword, and doesn't put importance on the body. But your natural body is weak and lacking. So you must start from the physical body. Xian Yen Shibwa didn't open his eyes, yet a strong presence was carried with his light words. It announced the beginning of Zuemo's tragic life. The mountain slopes of Wukong Mountain wasn't steep, but because of the winding mountain path, it took almost 6 hours to climb up on foot. The outer sect disciples of Wukong Sword Sect had suddenly found that Zuemo Shixiang would walk on the mountain path, panting heavily, sweat running down his back, as he went up and down. A few days later, a backpack appeared on Zuemo Shixiang's back. It was still up and down. Looking at Shixiang struggling up the mountain path, some outer sect disciples wanted to help but were sworn at by Zuemo Shixiang. All the outer sect disciples were puzzled. Was Shixiang masochistic? Each day, Zuemo wanted to cry. He didn't have the patience to treat others politely. Far away, standing at the highest point on the mountain, Xian Yen Shixiang was supervising him. Zuemo didn't dare to slack off even the slightest bit. Such a stupid method, your trash of a Shibwa is actually using such a dumb method. Pu Yao laughed continuously at his misfortunes. Zuemo gritted his teeth and raised his legs. His entire body was covered in sweat. Every time his bare foot touched the stone stairs, it would leave behind a wet footprint. He didn't pay attention to Pu Yao. He wasn't afraid that second Shibwa would find out, but because he didn't have the energy to talk. Now that he was thinking of those body cultivators, he asked himself, why didn't he think of cultivating the body? Each step he took, he could barely make it. If he stopped to rest it at all, it meant that this round was wasted, and that he would face a multiplied punishment. Second Sherbua's eyes were really terrifying, to be able to see so clearly from that far away. Every time he thought about it, he would wail inside. Second Sherbua, do you really have the free time to guarding a little character like me every day? Isn't it unprofitable? Don't you need to meditate, cultivate the sword, forge something? Do you want me to teach you a body cultivation art? Pu Yao snickered. Speaking of body cultivation, Mo are the true masters. Those in your shouja that cultivate the body, you all learned it completely from the Mo, but you really didn't copy it well. Ha! As the true allies of the Mo, I have a profound inheritance of body cultivation. Includes teaching and learning, would be beneficial for a lifetime, definitely without side effects. Zhua Mo was too lazy to respond to him. He bared his teeth, used all the energy in his body to move upwards step by step. Pu Yao laughed even more merrily. At the top of the eastern peak, Xiaoguo watched Zhua Mo Shixiang struggle up the winding mountain path. Her heart was deeply moved. She tightened her pink fists, determination written on her apple face. Shixiang is so strong yet so hard-working, Xiaoguo needs to work harder. She turned and left, deciding to multiply her practice time today. If Zhua Mo knew of Xiaoguo's thoughts, he would definitely wail to the heavens, Gu is being forced. In reality, his mind was entirely blank. After the energy was used up, a person's reaction times and thoughts would become slower. The second half of the ascent, it was completely instinctive. Zhua Mo couldn't even distinguish what Pu Yao was saying. When he finally reached the mountaintop, without a word, Second Sherbua picked him up and flew to fragrant ginger yard. In the yard, a large wooden tub had been set up over a large metal pot. The wooden tub was filled with a black liquid, the smell of herbs could be detected a long way off. Su Qing was standing next to the wooden tub. Seeing Second Sherbua holding Zhua Mo, she hurriedly lit the fire. Without a word, Xian Yen Sherbua threw Zhua Mo carelessly into the wooden tub before floating away. Splash! Like a ball of mud, Zhua Mo accurately landed in the wooden tub. The hot medicine bath made his pupils shrink and he inhaled sharply. At the side, Su Qing's face reddened slightly and then she said sympathetically to Zhua Mo, Shixiang, today's medicine bath costs 1 piece of 3rd-grade jingshe. The master said that it will be put on the accounts and for you to pay back in time. Zhua Mo's expression was fierce and twisted as he nodded, it really was too hot. He needed to pay for the medicine bath each day. They were really too miserly. Wasn't this forcing him to owe debts? But after the last few days, Zhua Mo knew it was useless to rebel and could only grit his teeth and accept it. Additionally, the effect of these medicine baths were extremely evident. If he didn't have it, Zhua Mo certainly couldn't finish the amount of training that Second Sherbua assigned. Then he would have to face an even more terrifying punishment. Sometimes, Zhua Mo had the feeling that Second Sherbua and Master were in cahoots. Su Qing was even more sympathetic as she reminded Zhua Mo, Shixiang, I need to increase the fire. A short while later, wails like pigs being slaughtered echoed through fragrant ginger yard. The female disciples that were working at the front of the yard all sympathetically turned to look and exchanged glances before sighing, really pitiful. Then they buried their heads to continue their own work. After the medicine bath, Zhua Mo seemed to sleepwalk back to the little west wind yard. The nightmare of the day finally ended. He wanted to drop and sleep. The bones in his body seemed to want to collapse, but he still forced himself to meditate in the rock room. Embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation didn't do anything special for the recovery of his body, but for nurturing the mind, it was very effective. Zhua Mo was suspicious, if he didn't have embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, he might not die from exhaustion, but he would first go insane from exhaustion. He entered meditation extremely quickly. Time also flew quickly. When he opened his eyes, his body was still sore, but the feeling that his mind was blank had disappeared. It felt that he could control his body again. The medicine bath had been prepared by Master. Supposedly, the more exhausted he was, the more effectively the medicine would nurture the muscles. With a hint of reluctance and helplessness, he stood. What he needed to do now was get to Sunset Lookout Peak before sunrise. If he was late, it would be very bad. At this time, the sky hadn't lightened, and was a patch of black. The mountain paths were still cold. The night sky above his head, Zhuemo flew towards Sunset Lookout Peak, the stars above him mischievously shining. Sprinting in the wind, Zhuemo only had one thought: this nightmare, please end quickly. He wanted to go back to his previous life of farming and dan-making. Even practicing the sword in the river was much better than this. Right now, he was counting the days on his hand. And what made him despair the most was what Master had said before leaving: only when Second Shirbua was satisfied. Second Shirbua satisfied. He had countless reasons to believe, in the eyes of the terrifying Second Shirbua, this was just the beginning. Just as Zhuemo was living through a tragic life, a shocking incident happened in Dongfu, and Dongfu shook. Chapter 75. Haze. The atmosphere was tense and heavy in Dongfu Hall, each person's face black. Wounds could be seen on some people. In front of them silently laid the corpse of Yuanli. It was a strange gray-green color. Yunxia Xianzi's eyes showed extreme sorrow. She, who was usually steady, couldn't help but feel trepidation. To search for the traces of the Yaoma who could force the stars in daytime, they had taken turns searching in Dongfu. Yet no one could have thought that they would encounter an ambush today. This definitely had been an extremely well-planned ambush. The enemy's target was Yuanli. There were many of them, all of them masked, and with astounding cultivation. Their cooperation was also extremely tight. Yunli was almost killed instantly. At that time, Yunxia Xianzi had been extremely close to Yunli. If she had hesitated in throwing out the Yin Thunder bead that she had just forged, she would also have been affected by the other's attack. It was only by relying on the Yin Thunder bead that she had barely avoided an ordeal. Who were those people? Tian Songzi's face was black. As the true ruler of Dongfu, to have someone publicly attack his allies in his lands was undoubtedly a provocation to him. Yunxia Xianzi calmed down her mind and said, with lingering fears, I don't know. They didn't use flying swords. All they used was 5 elemental smoke. In combination with their formations, it was extremely powerful. 5 element smoke. He raised his head in slight shock. He hadn't gone today. He said gravely, most of the people who use 5 elemental smoke are roaming shio, and it's not easy to collect such a thing. That might not be true. At this time, when Tai Sanren said heavily, it might be that they are trying to misleading us. It might not be easy to collect 5 elemental smoke, but it can occasionally be bought on the market. If someone really tried, it's not impossible. Their target was Mr. Yuan. So we have to determine their motives. Why would they target Mr. Yuan? Everyone who sat here was a veteran and their thoughts fell along the same lines. Tian Songzi instantly realized and followed up, they don't want us to keep investigating the stars in daytime. Yes. This point needs to be pondered. He opened, if they were here to pick up some benefits, stir the waters up, and then steal it away, then they would hope that we could find that Yama. Who wouldn't want us to find that Yama? That Yama? Yunxia Xianzi suddenly became alert, or the associates of the Yama. The others stared at one another, their faces instantly dark. The people that had attacked them had clearly been part of the same group and clearly couldn't be that wounded Yama. It was very likely that they were associates of the Yama. Before, they had assumed that it was only one wounded Yama, so no one had treated it seriously. With the power of so many Jindan masters, wouldn't it have been easy to exterminate one injured Yama? No one could have predicted that the situation would have changed so quickly. It was basically impossible to conceal the matter of the stars in daytime. Large numbers of Xiuzhe had hoped to hunt and kill the Yaoma and had furiously gathered in Sky Moon Jie. A wounded high-grade Yaoma meant countless Jingshi and countless talismans. There are actually Xiuzhe that have allied with the Yaoma. Wen Tai Sanren was furious. He raised his head and said, "Why couldn't it be a group of Yaoma?" Once the words came out, the enormous Dong Fu Hall fell silent. Yunxia Xianzi tiredly went back to her residence. Xiao Huan, seeing her mistress' expression, said with concern and terror, "Miss, why don't we leave? The matters here are very frightening." Yunxia grimaced, "How can we leave now? If we don't conclude this matter, we will let down the deceased Mr. Yuan." Xiao Huan bit her lips and said resolutely, "Then I will go find Yin beads for Miss. If Miss has a few more Yin thunder beads, then there's no need to fear them." "Silly girl." Yunxia patted Xiao Hun's head and said affectionately, "Getting a bargain the first one, how can you think you will get the bargain every time? In any case, I can't help Miss otherwise." Xiao Huan's eyes became misty. The two might formally be master and servant, but in reality they were like sisters. "Your Miss isn't that weak. At the least, I'm a Jean Dan." Yunxia hurriedly comforted Xiao Huan, but she was unconfident inside. His words circled in her heart. She knew that the situation in Blood Sky Metropolis Jia was worsening but didn't know how bad it actually was. If the Yaoma had really infiltrated Sky Moon Jia, then how bad was the situation in Blood Sky Metropolis Jia? At some unknown time, a drizzle of rain had started falling outside the room. Looking at the faraway mountains enveloped in the rain, the haze in Yunxia Xianzi's heart was just as heavy. Zuemo had been correct. His tragic life had just started. He's good-intentioned reminder combined with Zuemo's clever feinting, it had alarmed Pei Yuan Ran and the others. Only geniuses who were alive were able to become true masters. In the eyes of Pei Yuan, Shi Feng Rong and the others, Zuemo didn't lack for talent. More so, they thought that Zuemo still had hidden talents that were waiting to be discovered. However, his fragile body limited his development. Dying prematurely was something that was likely to befall him. In comparison, Wei Sheng was almost too strong in this area and didn't need their concern at all. Pei Yuan Ran and the others, after being advised, found that their initial thoughts were incorrect. For someone as multi-talented as Zuemo, it wasn't important to cultivate the sword, it was important for him to keep his life. Rather than nurture him into an average sword cultivator, it was much better to make him an extremely healthy turtle. The upper levels of Wukong sword sect sank into simultaneous reflection. Consequently, Xin Yen personally stepped forward. From this, it was possible to see how important Wukong sword sect thought Zuemo was. After the nightmarish cultivation, Zuemo's body had improved. Even though it still appeared thin, but there was some more muscles on his bones. Under the double influence of intense training and the medicinal liquid, he had gradually gotten used to the body cultivation. It was a pity that Zuemo didn't understand what his master and the other Shibo were thinking. Xin Yen Shibo personally teaching him, shocked and pained him at the same time. In all the elders, Xin Yen was the strictest and the one Zuemo was afraid of the most. How good would it be if it had been Yen Le Shibo? Zuemo couldn't help but fantasize sometimes. In the grass hut, Xin Yen threw a jade scroll at Zuemo and led him to a valley in the back of the mountain. Zuemo had came to this valley before. It evidently had just been flattened and there was an eye-catching seal formation at the bottom of the valley. Without a second word, he threw Zuemo into the seal formation. Shibo, what is this? Zuemo asked, slightly panicked. Xin Yen Shibo didn't pay attention to him and floated away. Zuemo looked in alarm at the surroundings. However, as nothing happened, his heart slowly calmed. Was this some body-strengthening seal formation? Such a good thing, why didn't they take it out earlier? For a while, nothing happened. However, Zuemo didn't dare to run out of the seal formation of his own accord. Shibo had thrown him in, if he ran out, the outcome would be bad. So he started to look at the jade scroll that Shirbwa gave him. There was a body cultivation scripture in the jade scroll. It was called Vajra Profound Sutra. Zhuemo was slightly shocked. From the name, it didn't look like one of the sect's scriptures, but more like the scriptures of dhyana cultivators. Where did Shirbwa get this? During his 2 years in the outer sect, he suffered through hardships trying to gather jade scrolls. Zhuemo held a special fondness for jade schools that recorded new things. This time he didn't need to spend contribution points to get this scroll. Zhuemo finally felt that he hadn't suffered for nothing. Curious, he kept on reading. As expected, it was a dhyana shio scripture. The scriptures of dhyana shio were mostly simple and their demands on personal talent were the lowest. However, what they demanded of determination and personality was much higher. This scripture was the same. There wasn't many complex parts, but what it needed was constancy. If this would be constantly cultivated, the body would be like gold metal, and if one could comprehend, the final level would be forming the Vajrapani's indestructible body. Of course, Zhuemo snorted at that. These days, no matter what jade scroll, they would always talk about how strong they were. It was the same as Pu Yao always labeling himself a Sky Yao. However, what Zhuemo found interesting was, Vajra Profound Sutra mentioned that the body would not be easily wounded. No matter what the circumstances, the most important was to stay alive. If it would be somewhat mastered, Yao Ma would be unable to approach near him, and nothing evil would be able to infiltrate. Zhuemo suddenly found, what he was learning was more and more varied. This kind of second-hand item, he's not ashamed to take it out. Pu Yao somehow came out and said with a face full of disdain. Second-hand? Zhuemo raised the jade scroll in his hand. Do you have it? I only keep the finest. Pu Yao said proudly. Like the yin bead? Zhuemo smirked. Pu Yao was like a deflated balloon. The incident of the yin beads had become Zhuemo's most effective weapon. Pu Yao didn't have any room to argue. But when he looked at the seal formation surrounding them, he started to snicker. Zhuemo's heart started to feel unconfident and couldn't resist asking, "What are you laughing about?" Pu Yao's crimson red eye held a strange laughter at Zhuemo's misfortunes. Zhuemo was very familiar with this expression. He had seen this expression too many times recently. Zhuemo couldn't help but feel something was wrong. Have a good time. Pu Yao was full of smugness as he went back into Zhuemo's consciousness. Zhuemo felt even more unconfident. Looking at the seals surrounding him, his heart trembled. Maybe this seal formation wasn't a body-strengthening seal formation. At this time, suddenly a faint mist formed in the surroundings. Zhuemo saw it clearly. The mist had been created by the seal formation. He instantly became nervous. Was it about to begin? The mist quickly spread. He couldn't see in front of him and became even more cautious. Hiss! A sword energy suddenly came out of the mist and shot at him. Zhuemo, already on the defense, sliced out with his hand, a sword energy leaving and accurately hitting the sword energy that was flying at him. Ping! A light flashed and the two sword energies destroyed each other. Before Zhuemo could react, hiss hiss, two other sword energies came out of the mist. Zhuemo didn't dare to drop his defenses and flung out two sword energies. Hiss 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 hiss. 4 sword energies came at him from different directions. He dodged left and weaved right, an extremely sorry figure. The sword energies increased in number at an astounding speed, so fast that Zhuemo couldn't react. When the sword energy entered his body, the needling pain caused Zhuemo to howl. Zhuemo finally understood what this damned seal formation was. Chapter 76, Body Cultivating Sword Formation. A sword formation. This was actually a sword formation. Damn it, why did Shirbwa throw him into a sword formation? Zhuemo suddenly thought of the jade scroll in his hand. If the muscles on his face weren't paralyzed, his expression right now would be deathly pale. Body cultivation. To use a sword formation to cultivate the body, which bastard thought of this idea? Zhuo wanted to kill them. He wasn't dumb. Actually, when he had thought of the Vajra Profound Sutra on his hands, he instantly understood. These sword energies were extremely small and non-fatal, but they were exceptionally painful when they hit him. Hard for a normal flying sword to wound. Zhuo suddenly thought of the phrase and his little heart shook. Was it necessary to first be pierced by countless flying swords to create a thick skin and then cultivate the heart to be wounded by flying swords? He almost fainted at the idea. However, he felt that this idea was probably the truth. In the first wave of swords, Zhuo had been struck 7 times. It was so painful he howled. Thankfully, the sword formation gave him time to breathe. The mist gradually dissipated, yet Zhuo didn't relax at all. He quickly took out Vajra Profound Sutra. If he didn't guess wrong, the next storm of swords would be coming in a short while. Xian Yen Shirbua's habits were like his sword, he wouldn't give people time to rest. Unfortunately, Zhuo had guessed right. Just as he read a bit of the contents, the second storm of swords started. With no attention to spare for anything else, he suddenly jumped up and the sword energies left continuously from his hand. Even though he had comprehended sword essence, he was still struck 12 times during the second wave. This time, he didn't make a sound. Inside, he repeatedly cursed Shirbua and unhesitatingly started Vajra Profound Sutra. If he didn't successfully do 1 round of Vajra Profound Sutra before the third sword storm came, he would just be ripe pickings. He almost couldn't deal with the second wave of swords. 12 strikes. The pain reached his bones. Thankfully, the language of Vajra Profound Sutra was straightforward and simple to practice. Before the third wave arrived, Zhuo finally completed 1 round of the Vajra Profound Sutra. A faint gold color appeared on his skin. Before he could admire himself, the third wave of swords silently arrived. Like the rain hitting the leaves, the pia pia rang out in his ears. As expected, the pain lessened. However, this wave of swords were much denser than the last 2 waves. Zhuo might have the Vajra scripture but was still dumbstruck. He didn't know how many times he was hit. In a daze, he could only hear Pu Yao's extremely happy roars of laughter. When Xian Yen Shirbua carried a swollen Zhuo back to the Little West Wind Yard, the outer sect disciples along the way that saw the scene all had the same expression: Zhuo Shixiang is very pitiful. After they had seen Zhuo abuse himself on the mountain roads every day, they didn't find it strange anymore. Of course, there were still rumors. Like Zhuo Shixiang had offended Xian Yen Shishu, so Xian Yen Shishu was exceptionally angry and was personally administering punishment. Or that Zhuo Shixiang was practicing a kind of legendary art. This legendary art was exceptionally cruel and that the female disciples in Fragrant Ginger Yard could prove it. When Zhuo had finally recovered in his own little yard, what welcomed him was the sympathetic gaze of the gray-beaked goose on the rooftop. Zhuo climbed up self-mockingly. He finally could rest for a few days. Before leaving, Shirbua had said that he would come back in 5 days. Clearly, the sword formation was not suited to being used every day. He also needed time to practice Vajra Profound Sutra. If he didn't improve before next time, he would die a terrible death. Vajra Profound Sutra had a slight healing effect. After practicing it for a little while, Zhuo felt his entire body had become warm. This shocked him slightly. In the scriptures he had practiced before, the most comfortable was embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. It was hard to describe the feeling of void. The feelings this time wasn't as enchanting as cultivating embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, but for Zhuo who was presently wounded, the warm feeling was actually more appropriate. Also, because it was easier to learn, there were no bottlenecks in Vajra Profound Sutra. It wasn't like embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, which always made him spit blood. After practicing for 4 hours, Zuomo's entire body was amazingly relaxed, the marks on his body had also faded. Zuo was overjoyed. He went to the ling fields inside the valley and felt heartache as he looked at the ling grasses in the fields. He hadn't taken care of the fields for quite a few days. Some of the more sensitive plants seemed slightly wilted. Zuo gritted his teeth and harvested all those ling grasses that were sensitive and near maturity. He decided to sell all of them. The remaining ling grasses were hardier plants. It was rare for Sherbo to have mercy. With a vacation of 5 days, Zuo could finally take a breath. Even though he knew that the reprieve was temporary and he would once again enter the nightmare after 5 days, he still planned on enjoying these 5 days. Listening to the sound tablet, Zuo hummed a little tune, his head on his arms as he looked at the jade scrolls that Elder Wei Nan had left. As soon as he relaxed, he couldn't help but think of making Jingshi. There was no way around it. She believed, if that waxy-looking man saw the sign, he would come find her. She had been frightened by Miss encountering dangers. When she found out that Miss had only survived due to the Yin bead that she had brought the last time, she knew how to help Mississippi. If she could buy a few more Yin beads, and Miss could forge more Yin thunder beads, then she wouldn't have to worry so much. She regretted very much that she hadn't brought more the first time. She stood guard every day but she never encountered the yellow-skinned man. She couldn't help but look at a nearby stall. The stall owner was a youth. His sign was also, buying Yin beads at high price. Xiao Huan was irritated. She recognized the youth. He was a disciple of Wentai Sanren. Many people had seen misuse the Yin thunder bead, and the origins of the Yin bead wasn't a secret. It wasn't just Yun Xia that knew how to make Yin thunder beads. The method of making Yin beads had been lost long ago, but the method of making Yin thunder beads wasn't hard to find. Additionally, Yin beads wasn't just limited to making Yin thunder beads. 3,000 years ago, there had been a sect called Deviling's sect which had specialized in making Yin beads. Of the various beads that could be made from Yin beads, there were also Yin thunder beads and Yin fire beads as well as others. But the most famous of the Deviling's sect was the Nine Heaven Devilings formation. The Nine Heaven Devilings formation, it was formed using 3,600 beads of various kinds to form the formation. This was a terrifying formation that could even kill Fanshu cultivators. In the past, other than selling Yin beads, the Devilings sect would also sell already made beads as well as simple spells to make them. So things like the Yin thunder bead had spread out. Due to the power of the Yin thunder bead, and the ease of making them, many shoujo would always have some. In the Great Battle 3,000 years ago, the entire Devilings sect had nearly been exterminated. The method of making the Yin beads had been lost, but the method of making the Yin thunder bead had been passed on. In reality, other than Wentai Sanren, the others were also trying to buy Yin beads. But the others were not as straightforward as Wentai Sanren. They hired locals to buy Yin beads. Xiao Huan was especially irritated when she saw Wentai Sanren's disciples' disdainful attitude towards her. Shameless. She cursed for the nth time, but because the others' cultivation was higher than her, she couldn't do anything. It naturally aroused the attentions of all the powers in the free market when a large group of people who wanted to buy Yin beads appeared. No matter how much they asked, they still didn't know what Yin beads were. Some brave fellows took some beads to make forgeries of Yin beads. The result was they were beaten until they were crippled. After a few days, the local snakeheads knew that this group wasn't easy to deal with and so no one tried again. So when Zuo wandered to the free market, and saw a continuous forest of signs saying, buying Yin beads at high prices, he was instantly dumbstruck. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.